Our protagonist wakes up to find himself reincarnated in a brand new world, though he's currently paralyzed, confused, and missing his memories. Wondering if a fatal accident sent him here, he quickly realizes his current state. He's a helpless infant. He lets out a natural wail, drawing a beautiful young woman into the room. She asks if he's hungry, leading him to assume she's a nurse in a hospital, until she raises a finger and chants, "Illuminate," conjuring a glowing orb of light. The sight confirms it. He's been reborn into a world of magic. The woman gently lifts him from his bassinet to calm his cries and provide him with some much-needed nourishment. Back in his crib, he's thrilled to learn this beautiful woman is actually his mother, Marie. While he's yet to be named, a tradition reserved for his 6th birthday, he learns his father is named Ashira. And as they head home, the local villagers gush over how adorable the couple's 3rd son is. As he rests at home, he obsessively ponders the mechanics of magic, noting the lack of lamps, and concluding that sorcery is a staple of everyday life. Eager to join in, he begins visualizing elemental powers like fire and lightning. Desperate to cast his first spell, he raises a tiny hand, straining to manifest even a simple light spell. But his efforts result in nothing but frustration and tears. Sensing his distress, Marie rushes to his side to offer comfort. Realizing he needs a better strategy, he decides to observe his family's techniques. Watching his mother cast Illuminate again, he deduces that magic is fueled by an internal energy source, mana, that must be drawn from within the body. Since his infant vocal cords aren't ready for chanting, he resolves to spend his time sensing and refining the mana dormant inside him. 3 years pass, and while he's spent every moment training his mana, he still hasn't cast a single spell. Growing up in a destitute farming family, his constant hunger finally drives him to find a way to contribute. He discovers 2 types of mana: internal energy and the ambient mana in the air. By inhaling and fusing the 2 in his lower abdomen, he learns to circulate and refine this power throughout his entire body. However, he's restricted from using magic until his 6th year naming ceremony, and even then, his parents only know basic lifestyle spells like Ignite or Create Water. Unwilling to wait, the MC practices in secret, channeling mana from the earth and circulating it through his limbs with surgical precision. He focuses on moving the energy in a continuous loop, refining it with every pass. He notes that while atmospheric mana is gaseous, it feels like a viscous liquid once inside his body. He concentrates intensely on channeling this energy into the soil, knowing that perfect mental imagery is the key to success. He visualizes the process clearly, but a momentary lapse in concentration causes the mana to scatter. He knows he needs to treat the earth like a garden, focusing on making the soil soft, warm, and nutrient-rich. Recalling his grandmother's farming wisdom from his previous life, he realizes he needs to cultivate the land with the same care one would use for high-quality fertilizer. He places his hands back on the dirt, focuses his intent, and tries one more time. This time, it finally clicks. He successfully managed to till several perfect ridges across a 10-square-meter plot. It's a start, but he knows his family is struggling immensely to survive. The soil in their fields is currently a disaster, hard as rock and completely choked with weeds. With no agricultural machinery in sight, the MC realizes he'll have to rely entirely on his newfound magical prowess to save his family from starvation. The technology in this world is primitive compared to his past life, and the magic system seems remarkably basic. This is his first time casting a spell since being reborn, and he views it as a monumental first step into his new life, even if it leaves him famished. He theorizes that mana consumption directly drains his energy, so he immediately begins planting. He chooses a vegetable known as a 20, which has a notorious reputation for tasting awful, but he's too hungry to care. To be honest, he had been regretting this reincarnation until this very moment. As he begins watering the fields, he quickly realizes that manual labor is grueling for a 3-year-old. It's been 5 days since his first successful spell, and he's been infusing the soil with magic every single day. Now the land has been transformed into a soft, fertile haven. Flowers are already blooming, a sign of a good harvest. But it's only been 5 days when it usually takes 20. This growth rate defies logic, but he's not about to stop now. Our protagonist pulls one out and is stunned by the root system. There are over 10 edible roots where there should usually only be a few. He takes a bite, but the taste is incredibly bitter and foul. Regardless, this small harvest marks the official beginning of his farm's revival. After improving the soil, he shifts his focus to selective breeding. Magic is clearly the catalyst for this accelerated growth, and while he misses the delicious food of his past life, he knows that patience is a farmer's greatest virtue. He is determined to use magic to defy the common sense of this world. He doesn't fully grasp the underlying theory yet, but the logic is secondary to the results. His vegetables are growing at an impossible rate, and he intends to take full advantage of it. He chokes down another bitter root, hoping to eventually improve the flavor of the 20s. But how can he achieve that? The scene shifts. Our MC is tucked into bed, recalling a past life lesson about Mendel's law and the hereditary traits of green peas. He realizes he needs more varieties to begin crossbreeding. Back in the fields, he meticulously catalogs every difference in the stems and flowers, noting the black and purplish-red hues. He finds rare white and yellow blossoms and notes that some plants produce larger clumps than others. He classifies every trait, dividing his fields into 6 experimental sections. What started as a desperate quest for food has now become his daily scientific routine. Along the way, he discovers that the vegetables themselves contain magic. He develops a unique technique that fuses internal and external mana, though the process is exhausting. Once his internal reserves are spent, he has to wait for them to naturally recover, a frustratingly slow process. That's when he realizes that eating the magic-infused vegetables significantly speeds up his mana recovery. After some testing, he notices his reserves replenish much faster, though the effects take a moment to kick in. Now he just needs to find which specific breed restores the most mana. What began as a simple curiosity has turned into a thrilling daily discovery. He prioritizes the crops with the highest mana yield to push his body's limits. He even tries a saltwater sorting trick from his past life. But since all the seeds sink, he decides to simply expand the field. Initially, he needed to close his eyes to concentrate, but he's now mastered the process. He senses a shimmering heat in the air and begins focusing his refined mana directly into his pupils. Suddenly, he sees a pale blue gas rising from the soil. He plucks a vegetable and confirms that this blue mist is being generated by the plants themselves. He watches as the mana leaks from the roots and escapes into the air. He's thrilled to discover that the plants with the deepest shade of blue are the ones that restore the most mana. With this new mana vision, he continues his research. He notices that the largest clumps are always the most mana-dense. 2 years pass, and at age 5, he continues to push the boundaries of magic. He even discovers a high-recovery mana technique that, while subtle, completely changes how he perceives the world. Seeing the world through the lens of magic fills him with constant excitement. He begins to wonder, if concentrating mana in his eyes grants him new sight, what would happen if he channeled it through the rest of his body? Previously, he'd circulate mana through his body and seep it into the soil. But he discovers that focusing mana into specific parts provides a massive physical boost. By keeping the energy internal instead of letting it flow out, he develops body-strengthening magic, making farm work and expansion a breeze. This sparks a new idea. If he can enhance muscles, why not internal organs? By boosting his digestive system, he accelerates the rate at which he absorbs mana from the vegetables he eats. After fine-tuning his magic for various scenarios, the peace is interrupted when his father prepares to depart. His mother tearfully sees him off, praying for his safe return. As the family's primary provider, his absence will be felt, but he has no choice. He's been summoned to the front lines. It raises a grim question. Why is a simple farmer being forced into the heart of a bloody, large-scale war? As it turns out, a massive conflict has erupted, draining the village of its entire workforce to bolster the army's ranks. Our protagonist realizes the world's stagnant technology is a direct result of this perpetual cycle of violence. In this world, land ownership is determined by how much one can cultivate, but constant war stunts technological growth and prosperity. Still, the boy remains calm, knowing his father is a seasoned veteran who has survived many campaigns before. Back in the fields, the boy realizes his unique cultivation magic is his greatest asset, especially since taxes are based on land usage rather than total yield. While his crops flourish, he worries about the abysmal equipment the conscripts are forced to use. If these men fall in battle due to poor gear, the village becomes unstable and everyone loses their homes. He hates the idea of killing, but in a world at war, he knows he needs to be prepared. Weapons and armor are the bare minimum requirements for survival, but the most vital resource of all is cold, hard cash. Unfortunately, the village operates on a barter system, meaning there's zero cash flow to buy gear. To solve this, he turns to his mother for advice, and she suggests weaving sandals from dried stalks to sell for a profit. While he finds the process inefficient, he sees it as a foot in the door to negotiate with traveling merchants. Soon enough, he presents his work to a trader who is genuinely impressed by the quality of the craftsmanship. The merchant pays him 6 copper coins, a disappointing sum that makes the boy realize he'll never afford weapons at this rate. Determined to find a better way, He grills the merchant for information on market prices and high-demand goods. After a few days of research, he decides to pivot his strategy. Using the intel he gathered, he begins experimenting with a far more lucrative product: magical mushrooms. The merchant had mentioned these fungi are incredibly rare and valuable, making them the perfect candidate for his next project. The main issue is their scarcity in the wild, but the MC quickly realizes these mystical fungi are actually just common shiitake mushrooms, though they taste surprisingly bland. He applies his knowledge of fungus and tree nutrients to attempt artificial cultivation. If he can replicate the environment where magical mushrooms thrive, the profit potential would be limitless. He begins the grueling process of hauling dried logs into position, thankful that the seasoning process is already complete. Cultivation is a delicate balance of moisture and timing. He knows that if it were easy to farm these, someone else would have done it long ago. He theorizes that since they're magical, they must require mana to grow, so he begins infusing the logs with his own energy. Now his days are packed, tending fields by day, enchanting logs by evening, and weaving sandals by night. After a patient wait, 3 mushrooms sprout from the logs. It's a start, but for a real profit, he'll need to scale up his operation to match the local merchants. However, space is becoming an issue. His house is already cramped, meaning he needs a dedicated storehouse rather than just more shelves. This presents an architectural challenge. He knows his magic can raise soil into ridges for farming, so he begins to formulate a new plan. By that logic, he should be able to reshape the earth into a solid structure. He isn't going in blind. He knows there's plenty of raw soil to work with. Using soil as a base is key, as creating matter from nothing is incredibly taxing. While games make earth magic look easy, doing it for real is costly and inefficient without a proper anchor. It's far better to manipulate what's already there. For some reason, our protagonist's magic only truly shines when he's working with the earth, even if he wishes he could transmute it into metal. The real test begins now, constructing an entire storehouse using nothing but soil. He begins focusing his mana, pouring everything into the spell, but the moment he attempts to cast the massive spell, his body gives out, and he collapses into unconsciousness. He eventually wakes up in bed, finding his mother watching over him with a worried expression. His head is throbbing, and he quickly learns he's been out for 2 days. He suffered from acute mana deficiency because he drained his reserves dry, nearly stopping the internal mana flow that sustains his physical strength. Back at the field, he reflects on his failure. He realizes he underestimated the mana cost of volume versus area, likely wasting 10 times more energy than needed. Pivoting his strategy, he decides to craft individual bricks instead, eventually completing a sturdy storehouse. The finished product is a bit rough around the edges and looks like an amateur's work, but it's a functional structure. Even so, it's his first major construction. As his mastery over earth magic grows, he turns his attention back to the village fields, which are currently in a sorry state. The land his ancestors spent generations tilling is now so ruined that even modern machinery couldn't save it. Despite his pride in the village, the sight of the wasteland is an eyesore. He casts a clearing spell, transmuting rocks and stumps into rich fertilizer. He's now mastered 3 distinct magic types: cultivation, physical strengthening, and material construction. He finds the name cultivation magic a bit wordy, and since he's the only one using it, a name isn't strictly necessary. Still, he finds himself chanting anyway, a habit from his long struggle to learn the basics. Placing his hands on the ground, he mutters the spell's name, and is stunned when the magic triggers the instant the words leave his lips. Until now, he relied entirely on mental visualization, which was mentally exhausting. By using a chant, he streamlined the entire process into his own original magic. Relieved that he no longer has to suffer through visualization-induced headaches, he chants, "Soil improvement," instantly tilling a perfect 10-square-meter plot. String-like threads of mana radiate from his position, marking the area he had been cultivating just moments before. By casting through a specific spell, he maintains a consistent area of effect while freely adjusting the soil density and mana output. He wonders if his habit of muttering the incantation is the key, so he begins a grueling training montage to master brickmaking. Months of persistence finally pay off as he masters the art of creating uniform bricks, officially completing his new construction spell. He realizes his progress is akin to Pavlovian conditioning, where the act of casting itself triggers the desired magical output automatically. With this breakthrough, he begins naming his various techniques, from body strengthening to soil preparation. The villagers watch in eerie silence as he piles up a literal mountain of bricks, clearly getting a bit carried away with his experiments. Realizing that having a surplus of masonry is becoming a nuisance, he looks for a new project. His mother suggests that if the bricks were dishes, they'd actually be useful, sparking a new idea. He successfully replicates the rice bowls from his previous life before setting his sights on crafting high-end white porcelain. He presents a pure white porcelain cup to his mother, who is stunned by its beauty. But his attempt to add a floral design reveals a tragic lack of artistic talent. He hates to admit it, but he's a total amateur when it comes to painting. Undeterred, he moves on to glassmaking using sea sand, successfully forging a transparent cylindrical cup. By doing this, he introduces a revolutionary new material that has likely never been seen in this remote village. Later, our protagonist sells his usual haul of magical mushrooms to the merchant. But his mind is already on his next challenge: scaling up production. He figures now is the perfect time to pitch his new tableware. To his surprise, the merchant is more interested in the bricks he used to build his new storehouse. Our boy explains that he made them himself and has a massive surplus ready for sale. While the merchant is stunned by the kid's productivity, our boy insists he check out the new tableware first. The merchant is genuinely impressed by the craftsmanship, though the boy keeps his manufacturing methods a secret. The merchant agrees to buy the lot but offers a measly 5 bronze coins for the tableware. Feeling completely lowballed, our hero internally fumes at the unfair valuation of his hard work. The merchant explains that while the pieces are beautiful, his commoner clientele simply won't pay a premium for luxury. He justifies the low price by pointing out the reality of the local market. Our hero realizes that without connections to the nobility, he has no way to reach the wealthy buyers who would actually appreciate his art. Without the internet or newspapers, breaking into the luxury market is nearly impossible. His disappointment manifests as a dark, unsettling aura that genuinely creeps the merchant out. To smooth things over, the merchant promises to buy every single brick the boy can produce, sensing a much more stable profit there. As the merchant hauls away the first load, the scene shifts to the boy standing before his next massive order. The merchant returns as promised, admitting that he only trusts the boy's quality because of their long history. This time, however, he's brought along some serious muscle to help with the heavy lifting. A bizarre beast with horns, wings, and dragon-like scales emerges from the forest. A creature the merchant identifies as a dragon horse. Stunned by the sight of a literal monster, our boy learns that these workbeasts are domesticated creatures bred specifically for heavy labor and transportation. These creatures hatch from eggs that absorb their owner's mana, meaning their final appearance and level of obedience are determined entirely by the person who raised them. Once the bricks are loaded onto the carriage, it's time for the dragon horse to take over. The merchant praises the boy for his hard work, noting that in this world, dragon horses are legendary for their power and bravery. These creatures are highly prized as workbeasts due to their immense durability, while winged variants are equally coveted for their flight. Curious about the market, our protagonist asks the merchant just how much these beasts actually cost. The merchant confirms they are incredibly expensive, as any creature suitable for a mount is considered a high-value asset. This realization hits home for the boy. He knows the demand for bricks won't last forever, and he needs to diversify his income. He contemplates hatching a workbeast egg himself, but he's hesitant. He has no idea what might crawl out of it, or even how the hatching process works. Still, he knows a successful hatch could be a massive windfall. Driven by ambition, the boy makes his move. With a spark of excitement, he tells the merchant he wants to try raising a workbeast and asks him to bring an egg during his next trip. When the merchant finally returns, the price tag is staggering. The egg costs every single coin the boy has managed to save up until that point. Later, while the boy and his mother are harvesting vegetables, they spot a group of weary villagers returning from the war. Among them is the boy's father, Ashira. The youngest sibling sprints toward him, crying out for Daddy. One of Ashira's companions notes how much the family has grown, as the couple now has 4 children, while Marie and the boy watch the emotional reunion from the fields. After the soldiers settle in, Ashira scoops up his youngest child and heads toward the house. Marie is glowing with happiness, relieved to have her husband back in one piece. She turns to her son and suggests they buy something special from the merchant next time he visits to properly celebrate his father's return. She asks the boy if he can lend her some of his savings, promising to pay him back as soon as she can. However, the boy's reaction isn't what she expected. He sheepishly admits that he doesn't have a single coin left, leaving Marie completely stunned. We flash back to when the boy was only 3 years old, where Marie wondered if the boy should be working the fields at such a young age. Back then, they struggled with blue 20 crops that tasted terrible and sold for even less. Yet even as a toddler, the boy was determined to work and provide. In the present, Marie and Ashira look out over the fields, amazed by what their son has built. Marie recalls the boy's early childhood ambition to save for the future, thinking it was just a phase. Now she realizes how incredible he truly is, managing merchants and trade deals all on his own. He's cultivated magical mushrooms, built his own storage facility, and even crafted tableware that left her speechless. Marie is bursting with pride, until the boy explains that his entire fortune was spent on a single workbeast egg. Shocked and frustrated, Marie loses her temper, unable to believe he would make such a massive gamble without consulting her first. She is livid, while the boy desperately tries to explain that the egg is a long-term investment. Marie snaps back, telling him that if getting rich were that easy, everyone would be doing it. She warns him that the egg trade is full of scams, and he likely bought a dud that will never hatch. To her, he hasn't made an investment. He's gambled away their family's security. The boy suddenly realizes the merchant conveniently left out the low success rate of hatching. Marie continues to scold him, reminding him that she only allowed him to trade so he could save for his future, not blow it all on a whim. The boy tries to defend himself, arguing that he earned the money himself, but that only fuels Marie's fire. With a terrifyingly sharp smile, she yells that the money wasn't just his. He also sold the sandals the entire family worked together to produce. To teach him a lesson, she officially forbids him from making any more purchases without her express permission. Riddled with guilt, the boy asks if he can still buy necessities, but Marie denies him, insisting he needs time to reflect on his recklessness. Ashira and the youngest sibling watch the exchange from the doorway, visibly shaken by Marie's rare display of anger. The boy realizes his mother is terrifying when crossed, but deep down, he feels the punishment is unfair since his bricks brought in the bulk of the profit. Determined to regain his footing, he decides to start a secret savings fund by gaming the trade system. With his gold gone, the egg is now his only path to success. He weaves a specialized net from 20 stalks to carry the egg safely at all times, knowing it needs to be close to his body to absorb his mana. He understands that mana compatibility is key. If multiple people handle the egg, the hatchling's quality could suffer. He notices a faint blue haze emanating from the shell as it begins to drink in his energy. The egg's natural mana is low, so the boy decides to take a more direct approach. He focuses his intent and begins injecting his own mana into the shell, watching as it darkens into a deep, sparkling shade of blue. He's flying blind regarding the exact amount of mana needed, but he continues the daily ritual, hoping for a successful hatch. To keep his progress hidden and the egg safe from prying eyes, he decides it's time to build a secret hideout. Reflecting on his mother's words, he admits that while he hates the lack of freedom, she's right. He is still just a child in this society. Here, the patriarch makes the rules, and the eldest son inherits the world, leaving younger sons like him to either serve or find their own way. He had been saving for a weapon to make a name for himself in the war, but now he realizes he needs to plan for total independence. His goals have shifted. He needs to prepare for a life outside the village's shadow. Carrying his egg and a coil of rope, he heads into the fields with a renewed sense of urgency. As the saying goes, he has to strike while the iron is hot if he wants to secure his future. The village is a small sanctuary surrounded by a wooden fence and a dense, encroaching forest. Due to the ongoing wars, the cultivated land is shrinking, making the world outside the walls even more dangerous. Undeterred, the boy leaps over the boundary fence, venturing into the wild to find a place of his own. This unclaimed territory belongs to no one, and the boy is determined to make it his. Using body enhancement magic to ward off exhaustion, he begins the grueling task of scouting for the perfect location for his secret base. Armed with rope, he lashes the trees together before manipulating the terrain to undermine their roots and weaken their hold on the earth. Sure enough, the timber gives way with a cacophony of snaps and groans, clearing the path for his ambitious construction project. After leveling the site with flattened earth magic, he prepares for the next phase, though he knows building a fortress is no simple task. Wary of mana depletion, he devises a clever workaround. Instead of casting a massive structure all at once, he'll forge individual walls to conserve energy. Working with systematic precision, he uses his handmade bricks as a foundation, visualizing the mortar binding them together. As his focus intensifies, his mental blueprint solidifies into a tangible stone wall. Piece by piece, a simple structure emerges, a tofu-like cube that serves as the perfect skeleton for his hideout. While the roof and doors will require manual labor, the primary framework is finished in record time. Inside, he examines the workbeast egg. Its pulsating blue hue suggests it's nearly time to hatch, but first, he must celebrate his 6th birthday. 6 years old marks the day of baptism, a milestone that brings him to the local church for his official naming ceremony. This ritual unlocks essential household magic, spells that allowed humanity to thrive in a world otherwise dominated by terrifying monsters. The ceremony is a symbiotic system. The people gain magic, the church gains followers, and the Lord receives a census of his subjects. Kneeling before the priest, he's warned that magic is a tool for the betterment of mankind, not a weapon for chaos. He gives his solemn oath, prompting the priest to open an ornate, ancient lexicon to finalize the rite. The priest declares that the third child of Ashira and Marie shall henceforth be known as Ars, invoking divine protection over the boy. As the blessing begins, Ars watches intently as mana coalesces into a complex magic circle in the priest's palm. Seizing the opportunity, Ars activates memory preservation magic to record every detail of the arcane symbols being etched into his mind. The ritual is a success, and Ars officially gains access to the suite of household spells. Testing his new light spell at home, he realizes household magic is static. It doesn't scale with his massive mana pool, making further training in it pointless. However, he has successfully pirated the priest's magic circle, and though it's bafflingly complex, he's determined to decode its secrets. Ars is currently struggling to decode the complex magic circles. He's frustrated, realizing he doesn't even know the modern alphabet, let alone ancient scripts. He sighs, wishing he could at least write his own name, when suddenly, he hears a sharp cracking sound nearby. He bolts upright and looks at the egg sitting beside his bed. It's finally hatching, and Ars wonders what kind of workbeast will emerge. As more cracks spiderweb across the shell, he grows impatient, briefly wondering if he should help it out. Just then, a massive crack splits the surface, and the egg bursts open, revealing a stunning horse-like creature with 2 horns. To Ars's surprise, the newborn beast immediately tries to stand. He watches intently as the little creature wobbles, struggling to find its footing, and offers words of encouragement to the tiny guy. After a bit of effort, the beast successfully stands on its own. Ars claps in celebration, feeling a genuine surge of happiness as he looks at his new companion. Gently patting the beast's head, Ars thanks it for coming into his life, and the creature responds with an adorable squeak. As he examines the beast again, Ars notes, it looks like a cross between a horse and a reindeer, with a powerful physique but covered in long, soft hair. He wonders if it'll be strong enough to carry heavy loads once it's grown, but then he notices it munching on its own eggshell and worries if that's even safe. He wonders what its diet will be, as a workbeast's nature is determined by the magic used to nourish the egg. He recalls that dragon horses are carnivores, which would be a financial disaster for a poor farmer like him. He's heard of many people failing to raise beasts due to the sheer cost of meat, and he worries he won't be able to provide milk either. However, the scene shifts to show the beast happily munching on a basket of radishes grown in Ars's hideout. Seeing this, Ars is flooded with relief. It's a herbivore. This means he won't go bankrupt just trying to keep it fed, and he can finally relax on the floor of his secret base. The beast approaches him with a playful growl. Ars laughs, noting there are plenty of radishes left and telling it to eat its fill. Instead, the beast growls again and climbs right into Ars's lap, quickly falling fast asleep. Ars is a bit bewildered by the sudden affection, but looking down at the sleeping creature, he can't deny that it's incredibly cute. He gently strokes its fur as it snores softly. 10 days pass, and the beast has already grown into a full-sized horse. Ars is stunned by the rapid growth, though he did tell it to grow big. It now looks quite imposing, and Ars knows he should eventually sell it. He had avoided naming it to prevent getting attached, but he decides it's finally time. He recalls his father calling magic divine protection, but Ars views it more like a mental program written through magic circles. He decides to test this theory by naming the beast. The beast has its own mana, and a successful naming should allow it to use basic magic, like producing drinking water, a vital survival skill. Ars worries about it accidentally gaining fire magic, but he'll cross that bridge later. He struggles to find the perfect name, wanting something that fits its 2-horned appearance without being generic. The name Valkyrie suddenly comes to mind, inspired by the legendary goddesses of war. Ars feels the name perfectly matches the beast's shimmering silver-white fur and holy aura. He asks the creature if it likes the name, and to his surprise, the beast nods in agreement. Seeing the nod, Ars realizes the beast is far smarter than he thought, and can likely understand human speech. He prepares for the naming ceremony, noting that his control over magic has become as natural as breathing. He closes his eyes and concentrates, determined to perform the ritual with absolute precision. He gathers a massive amount of dense mana, though keeping such a large quantity stable outside his body is a grueling task. This is the moment of truth. He meticulously recreates every detail of the magic circle he memorized using a fine thread of mana. Blood rushes to his head and his brain feels like it might explode from the sheer mental strain. Manipulating magic externally is exhausting, but he manages to manifest the circle. Pushing himself to the absolute limit, He completes the ritual and focuses his entire will on the beast. He officially declares the name Valkyrie, and the magic finally disperses. The mental and physical toll is far heavier than he anticipated. He's left shaking on the ground, gasping for air, knowing that a failure could have been catastrophic. Once he recovers, he suggests they test out Valkyrie's new magic, and the beast eagerly nods. Walking toward the door, Valkyrie lets out a small squeal, gesturing for them to head outside. Ars realizes she's being careful not to start a fire indoors, and is touched by how thoughtful his new partner is as he follows her out. Once outside, Valkyrie looks up as a brilliant light erupts from her. Ars is stunned by her mastery over illumination magic, praising her talent with wide-eyed wonder. Eager for more, he asks her to demonstrate other spells, and she obliges, cycling through ignition, water creation, and cleaning spells with ease. She doesn't stop there, levitating bricks across the field before showcasing a dizzying array of advanced techniques, including brick making, ground leveling, soil enhancement, and even physical fortification magic. Ars is floored when she displays memory preservation magic, but his excitement is quickly tempered by confusion. Usually children can only use basic household magic after a church baptism, so how is Valkyrie capable of this? He begins to wonder if there was a glitch in the magic circle or the naming process itself. To test a theory, he creates a cup from the earth and asks Valkyrie to replicate it. She does so perfectly, leading Ars to a startling realization. Valkyrie can only cast the specific spells that he himself has mastered. However, her power has limits. While Ars can adjust the scale of his spells, Valkyrie's ground flattening is locked to a uniform 10 by 10 meter square. It's clear the naming ritual is a rigid system rather than a divine gift, explaining why he couldn't customize his own household magic. He praises her, though he's now secretly worried about the implications of selling a creature that shares his unique abilities. If she possesses both his original magic and the church's divine household spells, she's a walking anomaly. He decides he must investigate if other workbeasts share this same magical potential. Later, Ars meets with a merchant to trade bricks, which are still a hot commodity. He casually probes for information, but the merchant confirms that magic-using beasts are unheard of. Realizing he's sitting on a massive secret, Ars downplays Valkyrie's nature when the merchant asks about the egg, claiming it simply hatched into a sturdy, load-bearing horse. The merchant is eager to see the creature. Having already warned Valkyrie to keep her magic hidden, Ars brings her out. The merchant is immediately captivated, not just by her utility, but by her pristine white coat, a luxury trait highly coveted by the wealthy. When Ars flatly refuses to sell her, the merchant is stunned, reminding him that the whole point was to turn a profit. Ars admits that while he needs the gold, he's grown far too attached to Valkyrie to let her go. As if sensing his loyalty, Valkyrie affectionately nuzzles him, and Ars realizes that having such a powerful companion will be vital for the grueling work ahead. Sensing a golden opportunity, the merchant proposes a new deal. He explains that he has 5 more beast eggs and wants to entrust them to Ars, under the condition that Ars sells the hatched beasts exclusively to him. Ars quickly grasps the benefit of becoming the merchant's sole supplier. Confident in the demand for beasts raised by Ars, the merchant is willing to take the risk even if there are initial losses. Ars sets the terms for the contract, establishing a 1-year agreement with an option to renegotiate. He recognizes this arrangement as the key to a stable income and a consistent supply of eggs. Determined to succeed, he turns to Valkyrie and declares they'll work hard to make this endeavor a success, to which she nods in agreement. Watching their strange bond, the merchant finally breathes a sigh of relief. Back at his hideout, Ars examines the new beast eggs and prepares to infuse them with his mana. Valkyrie suddenly approaches, and Ars has to warn her not to eat them. Despite his instruction, she gently picks one up in her mouth. The sound of a faint crack sends Ars into a panic, fearing she's crushed the fragile shell. Fortunately, the egg is unharmed. Valkyrie settles beside them as if adopting the brood, and Ars realizes she wants to care for them herself. He explains that while the form a beast takes is influenced by the magic they absorb, he'll let her help. Since she's already infused 3 eggs with her own glowing mana, he assigns her the task of nurturing those 3 while he handles the rest. This responsibility triggers a memory of a stray puppy from his previous life. He recalls his mother's stern warning about the true cost of care, food, medical bills, and constant attention. Looking at the eggs, he finally understands the weight of her words. Raising living creatures demands a massive investment of both resources and heart. Soon, all 5 eggs hatch successfully. Each beast resembles Valkyrie, though they are slightly larger. While Ars feels accomplished, he's immediately hit with a new logistics nightmare. 5 growing beasts eat a staggering amount of food, and his current supplies are dwindling fast. To sustain his business, he needs to expand his territory. He leads the pack into the forest to clear land for new fields, using his magic to soften roots and enrich the soil. However, his jaw drops when he sees the newborn workbeasts instinctively using magic to assist him. He's baffled. These creatures haven't even been named yet they're already casting spells with ease. It seems beasts follow an entirely different set of magical laws than humans. Realizing the danger of this being discovered, he tasks Valkyrie with teaching the youngsters to never use their powers in front of humans. With the new fields finally prepped, his operation is officially underway. Ars reminisces about his past life, where he measured land by how many Tokyo domes could fit inside. Before him now lies a wilderness so vast he can't even fathom its scale. Though clearing the forest feels a bit destructive, he justifies it by remembering these were once fertile fields before the population declined. Even the village head is pushing for the expansion. As he surveys the newly tilled earth, Ars realizes that creatures as massive as Valkyries will need enormous grazing pastures. However, this expansion brings a new logistical headache: how to travel across these distances without draining his own energy or exhausting his beasts. Finally, he looks to Valkyrie and suggests they try riding, marking a new chapter in his beast-taming journey. Even though she isn't exactly a horse, Ars figures a standard saddle and stirrups should work well enough on her. But his father quickly bursts that bubble, noting that no one in the village knows how to craft such specialized gear. He suggests a cart instead, as that's the standard for workbeasts in this world. Ars is hesitant. He's determined to master the art of riding, gripping his resolve as tightly as he intends to grip his mount. If he's ever drafted into war, being able to mount Valkyrie would be a massive tactical advantage, since cavalry always dominates infantry. With the future in mind, he fashions a makeshift set of reins out of radish stem rope. Even without the luxury of a saddle or stirrups, he decides to dive right in. He hauls himself up and takes his seat directly on Valkyrie's massive back. Clutching the reins firmly, he signals his trust in her. Usually, riding a living creature with a mind of its own requires years of practice, but to his surprise, mounting Valkyrie is incredibly intuitive. Her high intelligence is obvious. She moves with a gentle grace to keep him balanced, even without a saddle. But despite her care, Ars's body isn't used to the motion. Intense muscle fatigue sets in instantly, leaving every fiber of his being aching from the effort. He quickly learns that if the beast shakes, the rider shakes. To stay mounted, he has to squeeze her torso with his legs and engage his core just to keep from falling. He dreams of proper armor and a saddle, but since those are out of reach, he commits to a grueling daily training regimen. Later the scene shifts to Ars and his father winding down for the night. His father teases him about talking in his sleep, which Ars quickly denies. Between his writing lessons, he's been honing his magical perception. By channeling mana into his eyes, he notices a faint blue steam radiating from everyone. Wasted energy. He begins experimenting with sealing this leak, which drastically boosts his body's natural healing. Ars calls this spell cultivation, a technique that makes magical effects permanent and consistent. Whether it's leveling land or shaping bricks, the mana remains active far longer than a standard cast. By keeping a physical reinforcement spell active even while he sleeps, he can use fatigue recovery magic to fully recharge his body overnight. Waking up completely refreshed, he feels like a true hero. We then see the merchant visiting Ars's hideout, and he's absolutely floored by the progress. He expected maybe 1 or 2 eggs to hatch, but Ars has successfully raised all 5 workbeasts at an impossible speed. The merchant explains that it usually takes months for even a single egg to mature, leaving Ars to realize his mana injections are the secret to their rapid growth. Ars suggests selling one immediately, wondering if the merchant wants it for his own caravan. However, with a mysterious smile, the merchant reveals a much bolder strategy. He doesn't plan on selling the first workbeast at all. He's going to give it away for free. Ars can't help but look at him with pure suspicion. The merchant explains that this is a gift for the high-ranking aristocrats who rule the region. For a traveling merchant, breaking into the high-end market is impossible without the right connections and a sterling reputation. Noble-run stores hold a monopoly on luxury goods, making it nearly impossible for outsiders to turn a profit. Ars remembers a time the merchant lost a fortune on a rare item simply because he didn't have a noble middleman. The merchant confirms that in this world, big money requires big backing, but a workbeast is a game changer. It's a vital strategic resource, especially during times of war. Gifting one to a lord is the perfect way to forge an unbreakable bond with the nobility. Once the nobles see the beast's utility, they'll be begging to buy more, and will likely introduce the merchant to their inner circles. He warns Ars that ignoring the ruling class isn't an option when dealing with strategic assets like these. Selling to the wrong person could get them all executed. With the stakes clear, the merchant proposes a plan. They need to head to the aristocratic residence immediately. Ars is surprised to find he's invited along, and the merchant suggests his father join them as well. For the first time in his new life, Ars is finally leaving the village behind. The merchant, Ars, and his father set off toward the noble estate, aided by the power of the... After 3 days of travel along bumpy roads, their beasts finally pulled the wagon into the noble-governed town of Fontana. Ars, seeing a city for the first time, marvels at the towering walls and the scale of their journey. Even without the convenience of modern cars or trains, they made impressive time. He finds the city teeming with life and constant construction. The merchant points out the high demand for bricks, explaining that parts of the wall are being dismantled and rebuilt to allow for urban expansion. Ars realizes that while the brick trade is booming now, the locals will eventually catch up, meaning he needs to secure a long-term deal with the nobles to stay ahead. The scene shifts to the stables, where the three of them kneel before a man in formal attire. He introduces himself as Raymond, the negotiator for the prestigious Fontana household. While the merchant greets him with utmost respect, Ars feels a pang of disappointment. He quickly realizes that a mere commoner like him has no chance of meeting the head of a noble family directly. Raymond inspects the workbeasts, noting the reports that they can be ridden. The merchant beams with pride, boasting that these are top-quality creatures capable of even carrying heavy armor. Ars realizes the merchant's true goal wasn't just a sale, but to build a vital bridge to the nobility. Raymond then turns his attention toward Ars, noting his youth and inquiring about his role in the operation. The merchant explains that Ars was the one who personally raised these beasts, alongside his father. Impressed by the boy's dedication, Raymond remarks that such talent bodes well for the future of husbandry. The merchant then requests a formal permit to sell the creatures, which they've dubbed Valkyries. Ars is stunned. He thought Valkyrie was the specific name of his partner back home, not a name for the entire species. Raymond agrees to issue the permit and promises to brief Mr. Fontana on the arrangement. The merchant is overjoyed, but as Raymond prepares to leave, he drops a cold observation. These beasts are currently useless for actual warfare. The merchant is taken aback, but Raymond explains the tactical flaw. Their massive horns make it impossible for a rider to wield weapons effectively. Without hesitation, Raymond summons a servant and orders the beast's horns to be removed on the spot. As a servant approaches with a jagged saw, Ars is filled with horror. He moves to intervene, but his father firmly restrains him. Overwhelmed and powerless, Ars is forced to watch in silence as the negotiator coldly oversees the brutal procedure. Later at the inn, Ars sits on his bed, visibly shaken. His father praises him for maintaining his composure during the negotiations, but Ars can only mutter in frustration. He can't understand how anyone could treat his children so callously. When his father tells him to wash up, Ars looks at his rough palms and remembers the most haunting part. Even as their horns were sawn off, the beasts didn't make a single sound. He compares their behavior to the highly trained guide dogs of his previous world, bred and taught to endure extreme discomfort without a whimper. They are so loyal that they suffer in absolute silence. Ars realizes that his beasts, despite their power, possess that same tragic, unwavering loyalty. With clenched fists and tears in his eyes, he mourns the fact that they are too resilient for their own good. His father tries to calm him, but Ars voices a deeper concern: the physiological toll. He worries that losing their horns might shorten their lifespans, and if they die prematurely, the nobles will likely blame him. He fears the unpredictable whims of the aristocracy, where a simple mistake could lead to ruin. Driven by this anxiety, Ars resolves to study the beast's health and longevity to ensure his business and his family remain safe. Ars looks at his father, amazed by his stoicism. His father simply smiles, explaining it's the quiet resignation of a farmer who knows his place. Ars realizes that despite his father's lack of education, his wisdom is profound. He thinks back to when he first cleared the forest. His rapid progress sparked rumors of tax evasion, nearly leading the village chief to seize his land. To protect their hard work, Ars's father had tirelessly petitioned the noble family in charge. They needed massive beet fields to feed the beasts, but the wheat yield alone couldn't cover the taxes. Fortunately, the nobles saw the value in both the new work beasts and the land cultivation. This led to them securing a formal license, legal ownership of the fields, and the rare privilege of paying taxes in coin rather than crops. As they walk through the city, Ars's father suggests they do some sightseeing and shopping. Ars feels a wave of gratitude for having such a dependable father. While exploring, Ars notices a strange lack of wooden architecture and asks why it's so unpopular. His father explains that wooden structures are a massive fire hazard in a world filled with ignition magic. Ars also notes the lack of windows, learning that illumination magic makes natural light unnecessary. Ars is slightly let down that everything relies on household magic, which his father attributes to the divine protection of the gods. Ars wonders if this magic is truly divine, or just a tool unlocked by a magic circle. His eyes suddenly light up when he spots rare glass windows in the distance. He realizes that if he can adapt his spells, he could mass-produce glass just like he did with bricks. His father and the merchant exchange a look, knowing that whenever Ars gets that look in his eye, the world is about to change, just like it did with his radishes. The merchant recalls the dark days before Ars's intervention, when crop failures meant certain starvation. Famine had turned the land into a graveyard, and desperate wars were fought over scraps of food. It was during those bitter times that he first discovered the miracle crop, the radishes. Unlike the bitter wild variants, these were massive, crunchy, and incredibly filling. Most importantly, they grew at an unprecedented rate. Realizing these vegetables could end world hunger, the merchant traced their origin back to a small northern village and set out to find the boy responsible. To the merchant's surprise, he encountered a young boy, not yet baptized, selling these extraordinary radishes. Unlike typical farmers, this boy possessed a sharp wit and peppered the merchant with questions about potential new products. Intrigued, the merchant began visiting regularly, only to be met with an hour-long interrogation from the inquisitive boy every single time. Years passed, and the now older boy offered more than just produce, magical mushrooms harvested from the nearby forest. Concerned for his safety, the merchant warned him of the lethal dangers lurking within those woods. The boy remained undeterred, insisting he would be fine. Knowing many had met tragic ends with the same overconfidence, the merchant suggested buying bricks from the boy instead to keep him out of harm's way. The boy soon produced flawless, high-quality bricks before pivoting to exquisite tableware, further fueling the merchant's curiosity. He initially suspected the boy was of noble descent or from a fallen house, but every theory hit a dead end. Following the boy's baptism, he stunned the merchant once again by successfully raising valuable horse-like workbeasts from mere eggs. However, what truly left an impression was the boy's relentless drive for new business ventures. When the merchant finally asked why he was so desperate for coin, the boy revealed his goal was to purchase weapons for war, leading the merchant to believe he sought to restore a fallen family's honor. Despite being wrong again, the merchant resolved to forge a powerful bond with Ars. He believed Ars might one day ascend to the nobility. To secure that future, he vowed to maintain a monopoly on the boy's workbeasts and earn his absolute trust. While lost in these grand schemes, Ars snapped him back to reality by asking if they were going to finish their shopping. Startled, the merchant quickly agreed, mentally swearing his eternal loyalty to Ars. Though the boy was puzzled by this sudden devotion, the merchant's life now revolved around this remarkable youth. Eventually the merchant, Ars, and his father returned to their village by carriage. As they approached, Ars's mother spotted them and offered a warm welcome home. Overjoyed to be back, Ars rushed forward to embrace her. Reflecting on his time in town, Ars recalled gathering essential supplies, including a saw to process the massive fallen trees left over from his forest clearing project. He also managed to secure high-quality liquor for his father. While his trade with the peddlers was successful, he realized his current funds were nearly exhausted. However, he expected a steady stream of gold once the workbeasts were sold. Carrying the eggs entrusted to him, Ars headed to his hideout to see Valkyrie, his prized beast. He planned to market the Valkyrie species as an exclusive luxury, much like a limited edition supercar for the elite. But first, he had to understand the impact of horn removal on their abilities. Having hatched two beasts, he decided to perform a controlled experiment. One would keep its horns, while the other would have them removed. Recalling how deer antlers are trimmed to prevent injury, he reassured himself that these workbeasts were livestock intended for practical use. After offering a silent apology, he steeled his resolve and sawed off the two sturdy horns. 2 days later, Ars analyzed the results. While the hornless beast remained physically capable, it seemed completely unable to cast magic. He theorized that removing the horns effectively severed the creature's connection to mana. He compared it to a human losing their hands. Without a way to point or direct the flow, spellcasting became impossible. This discovery was a goldmine, Since no other merchant had seen magic-capable workbeasts, Ars's ability to breed them would grant him an untouchable edge in the market. Ars embraces the dehorned beast, relieved to find that the procedure hasn't put its life at risk. Feeling reassured, he decides to remove the horns of every workbeast he intends to sell. This ensures they remain healthy and manageable while stripping their ability to use magic, effectively safeguarding his monopoly on the trade. Later, Ars meets with the priest, who mentions that the boy has brought him something extraordinary. Ars assumes he's referring to his merchant permit, but the priest clarifies that the document is much more than a simple license. Ars reflects on his past, remembering that the only formal writing he'd ever seen in the village was the Holy Book. On rainy days when he couldn't work the fields, he would visit the church to study his letters, following the example of his literate parents. As the priest reads the document aloud, he explains that the cleared forest land has been officially deeded to Ars. While his father had arranged for taxes to be paid in wheat, the priest hints at a far more significant detail. The true weight of the document lies in its specific terms. It doesn't just grant him ownership of the northern clearing, it officially authorizes him to pay his taxes in cash. Ars is stunned, having not fully grasped the implications of the decree. The priest points out that because the document lacks specific boundaries or measurements, and accepts cash instead of crops, the land isn't strictly classified as agricultural, meaning Ars can use it for any purpose he desires. When a confused Ars asks for clarification, the priest explains that the Fontana family is treating him like a ruling lord. This grants him privileges usually reserved for high-ranking vassals who manage territory in exchange for monetary tribute and military support. Ars wonders why he's being elevated to such a status, but the priest suspects the Fontanas simply want to ensure he doesn't move his valuable workbeast business to another lord's land. As a third-born son, Ars's rapid development of the land has been unprecedented, rivaling the achievements of established noble houses. Walking back to his fields, he contemplates his new role, realizing he has effectively ascended to the ruling class. It's a position far beyond any child his age, and he resolves to use this period of being underestimated to expand his territory as much as possible. With his focus now on pioneering, he begins to strategize. Mounted on Valkyrie, he plans to charge through the forest using magic to soften the earth and fell trees, while his hornless beasts haul the timber away so he can level the terrain. However, Ars knows that mere expansion won't guarantee a steady income. He identifies 4 key resources for revenue: workbeasts, magical mushrooms, bricks, and specialized crops. While the beasts are his primary product, he needs a backup plan in case sales slow down or the demand for bricks eventually plateaus. Expanding his operations requires more manpower than he can provide alone, leading him to consider hiring help. Since the village operates on a barter system, he realizes he must manage his coin carefully while seeking out part-time assistance. During dinner, Ars consults his family about potential workers, and his elder brother, Baito, immediately and eagerly volunteers for the job. Amused, Ars clarifies that he's looking for a dedicated part-timer, not just a sibling, but Baito remains insistent. Their mother eventually gives her blessing, provided they both prioritize the upcoming wheat harvest. Ars remains skeptical, knowing Baito's habit of slacking off to go play, and vows to fire him if he becomes a liability. Curious about this sudden motivation, Ars asks his brother what's really driving him. Baito confesses that he desperately wants a Valkyrie of his own, feeling it's unfair that Ars is the only one with a beast to ride. Ars recalls catching Baito trying to sneak a ride on Valkyrie without permission, noting his brother's deep obsession with the creatures. Baito explains that riding a Valkyrie is the ultimate dream of any aspiring hero, inspired by the legends of old. He envisions himself as one of those legendary champions who rode into battle to save princesses, a fantasy that has completely captured his imagination. And so, Ars officially puts his brother on the payroll. Baito wastes no time visiting the hideout, though he's thoroughly unimpressed with the current state of it. Claiming it looks like a prison in the middle of nowhere, Baito mocks the aesthetic, causing Ars to clench his fists in annoyance at his new employee's lack of respect. Stepping outside, Ars places his hands on the ground and takes a deep breath, sensing that today is the perfect day to test his evolving skills. With a growing interest in architecture, he recalls his stay at a hostel in Fontana, where he didn't just study the building's design. He used his mana to perform a comprehensive scan of its structure. By channeling his energy into the bricks and letting it flow through the entire frame, he activated his memory preservation magic to create a perfect internal blueprint of the building's layout. Ars realized scanning the entire building at once was a drain because he wasted mana on empty air. By refining his technique to target only the bricks, he memorized the structure perfectly, allowing him to reconstruct the entire hostel in one shot. He begins by channeling mana into the earth to forge the necessary materials, meticulously reshaping them into the building's blueprint. Finally, he reinforces the structure with solid bricks and mortar. While the replica is slightly less stable than the original without neighboring supports, Ars solves this by adding 2 sturdy extension walls. These new wings serve as a stable for his Valkyries and a storage unit for his harvests, though he still needs to figure out a way to roof them. Even without wooden doors or furniture, the result is a massive upgrade over his old hut. This success marks a major milestone in his mastery, but his celebration is cut short when his father approaches with a grim expression. The trouble involves the local lumberjacks, leading Ars to seek out their leader, Maddox. After hearing that the woodsmen are unhappy with his independent logging, Ars meets with the veteran to settle the dispute. As they sit down to talk, Maddox takes a long swig of liquor, noting the impressive quality of the drink. Ars explains it was a gift from his recent trip to town, brought along at his father's suggestion to smooth over the introductions. Maddox clarifies that while the men aren't exactly furious, they are deeply offended. Ars mistakenly assumes they're worried about over-harvesting, offering to move his operations deeper into the woods, but Maddox stops him. The real issue isn't money, it's pride. Ars's mana-based logging trivializes the lumberjack's hard-earned craftsmanship and traditions. Realizing he's unintentionally caused offense, Ars listens as Maddox continues. He explains that for these men, their work is a sacred bond with nature, viewing the trees as treasures rather than mere resources. To them, seeing wood cut down and left to rot on the forest floor is a direct insult to their entire way of life. Ars finally understands that his drive for rapid progress has blinded him to the impact he's had on the community. He reflects on his father's warning, realizing he had been too focused on his own goals. Impressed by the boy's willingness to listen, Maddox watches as Ars is struck by a sudden inspiration. Ars proposes a partnership, inviting Maddox to join his development efforts. He believes that by combining his magic with their expertise, they can manage the forest together in a way that respects their traditions. To the north lies a massive, unexplored forest where many have vanished. Ars knows that unchecked deforestation could ruin the soil and leave the village without firewood for the winter, potentially leading to disaster. He suggests creating a managed, man-made forest. By planting trees with proper spacing, they can ensure a steady supply of premium wood and mushroom logs. He admits he's no expert in forestry and needs their help. This plan would fuel his projects while giving the lumberjacks a way to protect the woods they love. Though Maddox is wary of meddling with nature, he sees the clear benefits and agrees to pitch the idea to the others, even if he suspects his fellow woodsmen will be skeptical of the young noble's proposal. Maddox manages to sway the villagers, arguing that it's better for Ars to lead with guidance than to act alone. They eventually reach an agreement that allows the lumberjacks to monitor the progress, officially placing the Northern Territory under Ars's jurisdiction. Later, Maddox presents Ars with a massive supply of logs. Realizing these are perfect for cultivating magical mushrooms, Ars plans to scale up production immediately while leaving the forest's daily management to Maddox. After checking on his new custom furniture, Ars visits the vegetable fields he entrusted to his brother, Beto. He's stunned to see a massive crowd working the land. Apparently, Beto is a natural leader who has organized the villagers while practicing his beast riding. Ars prepares to apologize for the heavy workload, but a worker explains that everyone is happy to help because they receive a portion of the harvest. This system provides a vital lifeline for war orphans and struggling families. Even the village's unemployed have found a purpose here. Ars realizes that while he only considered paying workers, Beto's communal approach is far more effective for the village's long-term growth. With the labor handled, Ars focuses on hatching workbeasts and growing mushrooms, feeling himself mature alongside his projects. Now, 8 years old, he's ready for the future, until a new crisis emerges. The peace is shattered when Ars, Beto, and Maddox discover the fields have been ravaged. Beto points out massive tracks, indicating that an entire family of boars has been feasting on their hard work. Ars tries to stay calm, but Beto quickly rebukes him, explaining that the situation is dire. The villagers are so terrified of these monsters that they've stopped coming to work entirely. Ars recalls how difficult boars were to handle in his past life, but he realizes this is his own fault. His rapid expansion into the forest has thinned the trees and disrupted the ecosystem, forcing the wildlife to seek new food sources. Having developed a taste for radishes, the boars are now a permanent threat to the village's food security. As the overseer, Ars knows it's his responsibility to eliminate the threat and restore safety to the fields. That night, the group huddles inside a hidden cart, waiting in total silence for the raiders to show their faces. Soon, 2 gargantuan adult boars emerge with their young. Ars is floored by their sheer scale, and his heart sinks when Beto mentions that their hides are thick enough to deflect standard arrows. Panicked, Ars suggests asking the local aristocrats for aid, but Maddox shuts that down immediately, knowing the nobles would never help. Ars realizes he'll have to take matters into his own hands. Determined, Ars mounts his loyal beast, Valkyrie, and rides out into the field to face the monsters. He signals her to begin their coordinated plan, bracing himself as the massive boars come into view. He knows he can't take them head-on. A single strike from those powerful tusks would be disastrous for both him and his mount. Gripping the reins tight, Ars feels Valkyrie's steady breathing, which helps calm his racing nerves. With a silent understanding between them, Valkyrie bolts forward, the wind whistling past Ars's ears as they build momentum. He quickly realizes that aiming a precise spell from the back of a charging beast is nearly impossible. Pivoting his strategy, he decides to switch to his scattershot technique to increase his chances of hitting the target. Grasping a handful of stones, he infuses them with mana and unleashes them like a shotgun blast toward the boars. Even though he hasn't fully perfected the spell's trajectory, Ars can feel the power behind it as the image of victory begins to take shape. He grasps its function and purpose, but realizes his magic is significantly weaker without direct contact with the soil. Suddenly, the boars let out a deafening roar and charge, forcing Ars and Valkyrie to retreat into the forest. As they put some distance between them, Ars notes the terrifying speed of their pursuers. He recognizes the challenge of maintaining his pace while keeping a safe enough gap to avoid being trampled. Everything is proceeding according to plan, but he knows his scattershot is only one part of the strategy. Suddenly, Valkyrie activates a physical enhancement spell and leaps forward. The sheer height they achieve takes Ars by surprise, soaring high enough to see birds flying alongside them. Realizing Valkyrie perfectly understood his intent, Ars views her as a truly dependable partner. They land with a bone-shaking impact, shifting the terrain to reveal a massive, deep trench in the forest floor. The boars, unable to stop their momentum, tumble into the abyss. Ars surveys the scene, certain they didn't survive the fall. Reflecting on the strategy, he realizes the only way to defeat such beasts was by combining his earth magic with Valkyrie's incredible speed. He pats Valkyrie and suggests they head home, and she nods in agreement, ready to return. This marked the end of Ars's very first battle. Maddox stands in shock, unable to believe that Ars actually defeated the giant boar. Bite is visibly pleased, but Ars tries to reassure them that the danger has passed. However, Bite gives him a knowing look and asks what he means by that, revealing to Ars's dismay that there isn't just one giant boar causing chaos. Ars freezes as Bite explains that more of these great boars are ravaging the fields, and the task of handling them will now fall to him. Inwardly, Ars fumes at his brother's casual tone. He remembers the terror of facing the beast and how he risked his life, yet from that moment on, it became his duty to deal with every great boar that appeared. Ars is shown practicing his scattershot spell, realizing that long-range attacks are necessary to keep those giant boars at a safe distance. By defeating his first giant boar and several others, he continues to hone his magic. He can fire multiple stone shots shaped like arrowheads, even while riding Valkyrie. Although the power diminishes over distance, he can shoot effectively from 30 meters away. Solidifying scattershot into a formal spell is going well, but it's still not powerful enough to kill a boar on its own. Since digging pits for every encounter is tedious, Ars considers an alternative, building a sturdy defensive wall around the village to ward off external threats. He decides to build walls along the border between the forest and the fields, including areas planned for future cultivation. These walls would serve as a reliable safety barrier for the workers. Recalling the damage to his previous makeshift traps, he concludes that these new defenses must hold against boars up to 3 meters in size, giving the villagers enough time to escape. Ars begins by creating 5 by 5 meter blocks for the wall. The walls are thick and filled with sand for added density, though he's unsure if the structure will hold. He can only create 5-meter sections at a time, so he plans to connect multiple blocks. Ars reflects on his expanding mana capacity, which seems to grow exponentially every time he builds something new. This growth gives him the confidence to attempt even larger creations. Turning this wall-building technique into a formal spell would simplify the task, but imprinting a spell takes time. To imprint a spell, he must cast it repeatedly while chanting to preserve the mental image and conditions. It took months to master the brick spell, requiring endless chanting. However, wall creation proves easier than scattershot, likely due to his experience building the hostel. By channeling mana into the structure and using memory preservation, he's able to replicate the magic consistently, resulting in a much faster learning curve. Now that the wall creation spell is ready, Ars brings 5 horned Valkyries who, after being named, can also replicate his mastered spells. Together, they begin constructing the massive wall. Ars takes occasional breaks to snack on magical mushrooms for mana recovery, which proves surprisingly effective. Eventually, he manages to complete a sturdy, 4-kilometer perimeter wall around the fields. He shows the wall to Beto, who inspects the quality by knocking on the stone. Beto admits it's impressive but points out a glaring issue. There's no entrance. Ars's eyes widen as he realizes he completely forgot to add a gate, so Beto suggests building a road leading to a new opening to make it accessible. Ars reflects on his past failed attempts at road building and decides to take this chance to do it right. He sets up 2 main entrances, one leading toward the village and another toward the forestry area, while contemplating the best way to pave the path. While concrete and asphalt look nice, they require too much maintenance, so Ars recalls a legendary design from his past life: Roman cobblestone. He follows the ancient steps, digging a deep trench, filling it with layers of rock and gravel, topping it with clay, and finally laying down thick stone pavers with a slight incline for perfect drainage. Paving in a straight line is crucial, as even a tiny mathematical error could lead him miles off course. But Ars eventually completes the construction. He's unsure about long-term maintenance, but he figures he can eventually turn the process into a spell with the Valkyrie's help. As he sits in thought, a voice calls out from behind him. He turns to see Carl, his youngest sibling, who recently finished his naming ceremony. Ars greets him, surprised to see him out here, and Carl explains he finished his chores and came to hang out since Ars and Beto are always working late. Noticing Ars looking troubled, Carl asks what's wrong, and Ars admits his new window glass isn't selling at all. Carl mentions the transparent boards piling up in storage that their mother keeps complaining about. Ars thought the town would love them, but Carl explains that the locals aren't interested in changing their lifestyle. In a barter-driven economy, people won't spend resources on non-essentials, though Carl admits he's always admired the beautiful furniture in Ars's room. Ars explains the furniture was crafted by skilled lumberjacks, but Carl points out that they don't sell their work. Ars wonders if it's because the pieces are too heavy to transport, but Carl has a different perspective. He explains that villagers rarely need replacements, and selling in town is impossible without workbeasts to pull carts. Realizing the potential, Ars decides to talk to the lumberjacks about starting a business. He dreams of creating a steady income for the village that doesn't rely on his magic, which would mean building a workshop and hiring staff, essentially starting his own company. Carl is amazed by Ars's grand ambitions, but Ars just tells his brother to enjoy his youth while he can. Carl laughs, reminding Ars that he's only 2 years older and still a kid himself. He then asks if Ars will teach him magic, just like he taught Beto. Thinking back to Beto's lessons, Ars remembers how upset their mother was, which only piques Carl's curiosity. Ars recalls the time he was trying to grow better radishes, and Beto questioned how he could lift such heavy weights. That was when Ars first started testing physical enhancement magic on his own body, to see if it could be taught to others. He decided to teach Beto how to conjure and circulate mana. While Beto had zero talent for agricultural magic, he was a natural prodigy when it came to physical enhancement. Once he mastered the skill, Beto's strength reached terrifying new heights. Soon, Beto started getting into fights with other kids in the village. Ars didn't know the specifics, but children will fight over almost anything. Beto became completely invincible, and when the other kids brought in older boys as backup, Beto just crushed them too, reigning supreme over the local youth. Ars tells Carl that, honestly, magic alone didn't make Beto that strong. He was already naturally bigger and tougher than everyone else. The magic just acted as a catalyst for his innate power. However, the older kids eventually started ganging up on Beto to win. Despite coming home covered in bruises, Beto never faltered and refused to back down. Through these constant battles, his combat prowess only grew more formidable. Beto began skipping work to fight, ignoring every warning until their mother was driven to tears. Eventually, no one in the village dared to oppose him. Ars explains that this experience taught him not to teach magic irresponsibly, but he's still willing to make an exception for Carl. Carl is a bright kid, unlike the muscle-brained Beto, and he's thrilled by the offer. Ars explains that by concentrating mana in the brain, he can boost memory and calculation speeds. While he doesn't regret teaching Beto, since his strength helps him lead the village today, Ars wants a different path for Carl. Ars would rather Carl focus on mental enhancement instead of raw muscle. He wants Carl to master reading and mathematics so he can become the administrator the village desperately needs. If Carl succeeds, he'll be the perfect partner to help manage Ars's growing workload. The scene shifts, and a mysterious foreigner stands before Ars, Carl, and their father. He introduces himself as Gran, a traveling merchant specializing in items created through magic. He heard rumors that this village successfully hunted giant boars and came to see the truth for himself, though the trio is momentarily distracted by his strange foreign accent. Ars asks if Gran hails from the east, curious if he's from an island nation. Gran clarifies he isn't, but Ars tells him not to sweat the details before welcoming him to inspect the remains of the giant boars. Gran expresses his thanks, mentioning he's eager to meet the legendary warrior who actually managed to take down such massive beasts. When Ars reveals he's the one responsible, Gran is floored that a mere child could pull it off. Ars explains it was a team effort involving traps, while Beto scoffs, failing to see why Gran is so obsessed with a few oversized pigs. Gran explains that these boars use hardening magic, which is why Ars's arrows couldn't pierce their hides. He reveals that magic-imbued materials are priceless. A weapon forged from a boar's fang can actually surpass the strength of steel, leaving Ars thrilled that he didn't throw them away. Brimming with excitement, Ars asks if Gran truly has the skills to forge a powerful weapon from those fangs. He eagerly begs Gran to craft a blade for him, promising to pay whatever the craftsman asks for his services. Later, Gran examines the fangs and is stunned by their quality. Because Ars killed the beast while it was mid-cast, the fangs are still surging with mana traces, which Gran explains will allow for far superior mana conductivity in the finished blade. They have the potential to create a legendary weapon, but Gran points out a major hurdle. To process such high-level materials, they need a proper workshop and a catalyst, neither of which the village possesses. Specifically, they need a furnace capable of reaching extreme temperatures. They also need a mana core, a rare organ used by magical beasts to channel their power. Ars understands the furnace requirement, but the concept of a mana core is entirely new to him. Ars pulls out a Valkyrie horn, asking if it could serve as a viable substitute for a core. Gran handles the horn like a sacred relic, examining it carefully before confirming that it will work perfectly as a catalyst. Ars is delighted, but Gran is surprised to see such a rare horn from a local rock beast, leaving Ars impressed by the man's keen eye. Gran mentions that some regions hunt these beasts specifically for mana core research. This revelation makes Ars realize he's been underselling the value of his Valkyries and needs to be more careful with his trade partners. With the catalyst secured, the only thing left is the furnace. Gran warns that it's no simple task, but a determined Ars declares he'll build one himself. Ars hopes his custom bricks are heat-resistant enough for the job, willing to risk it for a new weapon. However, Gran notes they'll also need bellows to pump air and raise the temperature to the required levels. Ars is worried since he can only manipulate soil, not wood, but Gran's eyes light up with passion. He tells Ars that a true creator never gives up, and together, they'll find a way to make it happen. Later, Ars sips on a newly brewed mana potion. He's surprised to find that the concoction, made from dried magical mushrooms, tastes exactly like the tea from his previous life. Gran notes that using high-quality charcoal helped stabilize the brewing temperature, resulting in a superior potion. He then reveals his next project, using a magical mushroom catalyst to forge defensive gear. By soaking giant boar fur in the mana potion, Gran can create enchanted leather armor. It won't be as sharp as the fang blade, but it'll be tougher than any standard armor, leaving Ars in awe of Gran's versatile craftsmanship. Gran expresses his gratitude for Ars's presence in the village, but warns the boy to prepare for several sleepless nights ahead. Ars realizes that while Gran is a legendary craftsman, he's blissfully unaware of how his work ethic robs others of their rest. Luckily, Ars had already developed a meditation spell to recover from fatigue instantly, allowing him to survive Gran's relentless pace without collapsing. After days of grueling labor, the leather armor is finally complete, and the craftsmanship is exceptional. However, it's clearly too large for a child, leading Gran to ask if there was a mistake. Ars explains that crafting it in his current size would be a waste since he'd outgrow it in no time. Instead, the armor is a gift for his brother, Beto, who has been working tirelessly in the fields. Ars plans to inherit the set once he's big enough to fill it out. Gran is impressed and promises to forge Ars a brand new set when that day comes, before asking what their next project should be. Ars, however, suggests they take a breather. He proposes that Gran focus on teaching the local workers how to mass-produce these goods. Gran agrees, though he clearly prefers the thrill of creation over teaching. To keep the master craftsman's spark alive, Ars presents him with a unique architectural challenge. He tasks Gran with designing a building using only a limited number of bricks, the same amount Ars used for his 2-story hostels. This constraint is vital because it allows Ars to perfectly replicate the design using his memory preservation magic. Ars explains that if Gran can design a functional home within these limits, Ars can use his magic to mass-produce them instantly. He even encourages Gran to use mortar to maximize every inch of space within the structure. Intrigued by the puzzle, Gran accepts the challenge with a grin. As Gran gets to work, Ars decides to conduct some experiments of his own. Recalling the powerful sword Gran forged from a boar's fang and a Valkyrie horn, Ars realizes the materials allowed the weapon to gain the harden ability. He wonders if combining different resources could yield even more magical properties. Gathering a great boar's fang, a Valkyrie horn, heat-resistant bricks, and mana-infused clay, Ars begins his trial. His goal is to create a brick with unrivaled durability. Usually, bricks are hardened before being mixed, but Ars tries an unconventional method. He decides to grind the bricks into powder, mix them with the horn, fang, and clay, and then bind it all with a boiled mana potion. Drawing on knowledge from his previous life, he creates several samples with different ratios. He carefully shapes the mixtures and places them in the furnace, but the initial results are nothing but a string of failures. Undeterred, Ars realizes he needs to adjust more than just the mana potion levels. He needs to refine how many times he kneads the mixture. After countless attempts, he finally produces a remarkably sturdy brick. It has a smooth, marble-like finish that stands out from his previous reddish-brown creations. He dubs it the hardened brick. This achievement fulfills Ars's long-standing goal of creating a material as strong as metal. He reflects on how his reliance on modern world logic had actually been holding him back. By getting his hands dirty and working through the process manually, he finally broke through his limitations. This success is just the beginning of his journey to master magical construction. He casts memory preservation on the brick to ensure he can replicate it perfectly. Placing his hands on the ground, he focuses his mana to manifest the material from nothing. By applying the same logic he used for his building magic, he successfully develops a brand new spell, Hardened Brick Creation. Now he can generate these indestructible blocks using pure magic, no fangs or horns required. He begins paving the village roads, and though he originally wanted a Roman cobblestone look, the result is a sleek, marble-like surface. While his road replacement spell doesn't quite work with these new bricks, the smooth finish is actually better for carts. Later, Ars stands before the building Gran designed, feeling a surge of joy at its unexpected spaciousness. Gran explains that he incorporated numerous windows to save on building materials, while maintaining the structure's integrity. He proudly showcases the finished product, which meets all of Ars's specifications, including beautiful arched doorways and glass windows. He got the idea for the windows after hearing that Ars had unsold glassware sitting in the storehouse. Ars examines the architecture and realizes Gran's design doesn't just save materials, it significantly boosts the building's sturdiness. Since stone is highly resistant to compression, the arches provide a clever, durable solution. Ars compliments Gran on the open, airy feel of the house. Gran beams with pride, happy that his hard work is appreciated. Eager to show his gratitude, Ars offers Gran any reward he might desire. To his surprise, Gran asks for the right to build his own home on this land. Gran explains that while he's a nomad, he wants a place to return to, especially since life around Ars is so full of wonder. Ars had previously denied other villagers' requests to live within the walls to protect the Valkyrie's privacy, but he knows a talent like Gran is worth the exception. With a smile, Ars agrees, allowing the master craftsman to settle down. And just like that, Gran becomes the very first official resident of Ars's growing territory. Ars reflects on his eldest brother Hector's recent marriage, noting how unusual it is to wed at just 14, even in this world. With their home becoming increasingly cramped, Hector and his new bride have moved into an expanded section of the storeroom. In this society, the eldest son inherits everything, while other siblings often remain as laborers for the family. Despite his love for them, Ars has been quietly planning his independence since the age of 5. With his resolve hardened, he prepares to leave his parents' home and forge his own destiny. Ars and his Valkyries stand in the open fields, ready to begin the massive land development project. His first step is moving the base to the center of the territory. From there, he recreates the housing designed by Gran, but this time, he swaps standard bricks for magically hardened ones to ensure maximum durability. Using these reinforced materials, he constructs 4 massive kilometer-long walls to encircle his property, and uses road placement magic to pave the paths connecting them. He designates the southern area for Gran, the construction-obsessed craftsman who has already built a house on his allotted land. Ars is so impressed by the work that he decides to save the blueprints using memory preservation magic. He also builds several hostel-style houses for Beto along the southern road. Beto plans to share his new home with friends while renting out extra rooms to laborers working the fields. Meanwhile, the northeast forest is designated for forestry, where lumberjacks like Maddock have already begun charcoal production and log management. Lastly, the central hub becomes Ars's private residence, featuring living space for the Valkyries and cultivation grounds for magical mushrooms. He keeps the horned Valkyries confined to this middle area for safety. By the time the development is complete, Ars is already 9 years old. The scene shifts to Ars cooking when a peddler approaches him, curious as to why Ars gave land to a traveler but not to him. Ars jokingly points out that a traveling merchant has no use for land, but the peddler insists he doesn't plan on wandering forever. He dreams of opening his own shop and demands a plot of land for himself. When Ars calls him out for lying about magic using beasts, the peddler argues that they are both equally guilty of keeping secrets. Ars knows the man is fixated on the value of magical Valkyries, but selling them as luxury goods is far too dangerous. Ars eventually relents, telling the peddler he can open a shop on the property. The merchant is thrilled at the prospect of a food stall, and Ars admits he's beginning to trust the man's business instincts. However, the peddler's expression darkens as he mentions a rumor about a dangerous group of people lurking in the area. Ars is surprised, but the peddler clarifies that he is the one being called dangerous. Ars is taken aback, insisting he's perfectly angelic, but the merchant tells him to stop the self-delusion. Ars protests that he hasn't done anything wrong. The peddler explains that the local nobles are unsettled by the sudden appearance of a massive walled fortress. With tax season approaching, the collectors will soon be at his door demanding answers. Ars feels confident since he has permission to govern the land, but he knows he must be prepared. Usually, poll and land taxes are collected annually in wheat, but because Ars pays in gold, the collectors visit his home personally. This year is different. The tax collector announces that the Fontana family is conducting a total requisition of Ars's northern lands. Every personal belonging on the land is now considered property of the Fontana family. As Ars processes this, he realizes the merchant was right. The nobles are moving in to seize his valuable Valkyries under the guise of protection. To an ignorant child, a guaranteed livelihood might sound like a blessing, but Ars is different. With memories of a free world from his past life, he refuses to be treated like livestock kept only for breeding and labor. Suddenly, a violent crash echoes from the stable. Ars rushes toward the sound, with a suspicious tax collector hot on his heels. He bursts into the stable, fearing for Carl's safety, while the tax collector follows closely behind. Inside, he finds a horrific scene. A Valkyrie and Carl are lying on the ground, side by side, drenched in blood. A man stands over them, his sword dripping red and his eyes burning with rage. He turns toward Ars, asking with a growl if he plans to get in the way as well. The man claims he was simply taking the beast when the kid attacked, leaving Ars terrified as the man warns him not to act superior before lunging at him. The scene shifts to Baito entering a room where Carl lies unconscious, with Ars shaking beside him. Baito asks if they're okay, and Ars quietly confirms they are. He explains that Carl is fine but unconscious, likely protected by the Valkyrie. Despite the blood, his head wound is relatively minor. Baito then asks Ars if he's truly all right. Ars flashes back to the moment the man lunged at him, recalling the split-second decision he was forced to make. He used his scattershot spell to kill the man instantly. Snapping back to the present, Ars tells Baito he's fine. He insists he doesn't have a single scratch. Baito realizes he isn't talking about physical wounds, but drops the subject, informing Ars their father will gather allies once Carl wakes. Ars silently thanks Baito for not prying. He reflects on the kill, while the peddler notes that Ars won't be getting out of this situation without consequences. Baito reflects on his childhood, remembering the constant hunger of the Great Famine and how his 3-year-old brother, Ars, began working the fields. Baito initially thought Ars was a fool. He didn't understand how, but Ars succeeded in growing radishes, miraculously transforming the parched, dead earth into rich, fertile soil. Even though Baito was 2 years older, Ars was stronger. Baito learned this the hard way when he tried to bully Ars for his radishes, only to be shocked by his brother's power. Ars shared his secret without hesitation. He was using mana to strengthen his body. While Ars expanded the field into the village's finest, he refused to work on others' land, citing his own busy schedule. This led the villagers to label Ars as a bad person, harboring secret resentment toward him. Baito admits he rarely understands his brother's mind, but he is still his family. Baito spent his time beating up anyone who badmouthed Ars. He felt guilty worrying their mother, often returning home bruised after fighting off groups, but he wouldn't let anyone bully his brother. Ars once critiqued Baito's punching form, telling him to focus more on his wrist. After training with that advice, Baito never lost again, not even to older, more numerous opponents. Ars eventually gifted workbeasts to the nobility in exchange for land and saved the village from giant boars. Finally, the village's respect for Ars was absolute. Baito dedicated himself to riding Valkyries and mastering the sword. As Ars's older brother, He felt he had to be strong enough to face knights and monsters alike. Others were stunned by Ars's massive mana capacity. Baito realized Ars had been hiding his true potential, and it motivated Baito to push his own limits even further. Ars addresses his father, Baito, Maddox, the peddler, and Gran, urging them to rally the villagers. He warns that the nobles plan to seize his land and kill both him and Carl. He declares they will fight to protect their rights against the nobles' tyranny, asking his inner circle to spread this message to everyone in the village. He promises that anyone who stands up for their family will be granted magic and a portion of his land, hoping this incentive will mobilize the entire community. Baito takes charge while Maddox handles the lumberjacks. Ars hopes the peddler can gather intel from the streets, and the man agrees to scout the enemy's strength. After a firm handshake, Ars warns him to stay safe. Before departing, the peddler tells Ars not to die. Ars reflects on the absurdity of a simple farmer opposing a noble. He never imagined he'd reach a point where "don't die" was a literal warning for his life. Worried he wouldn't find enough recruits, Ars is stunned by the turnout. Vargas notes that while a typical draft only brings in 50 men, they've managed to gather 78, a massive improvement. These lumberjacks are sturdy and reliable. Baito's popularity among the young fighters and the poor, whom Ars provided with jobs, has clearly paid off. Ars explains that he has officially granted these loyal villagers a new identity. By giving everyone the family name Baruka, Ars allows them all to use magic. This shared name creates an unbreakable bond of unity. To solidify his leadership, Ars spars with Vargas to prove his martial prowess. This demonstration unifies the group under a single cause and skyrockets morale. Ars realizes that while some might have fled if things got ugly, his victory over Vargas earned their genuine respect. Afterward, Vargas jokingly calls Ars general. Ars is taken aback, insisting that Vargas should be the one in command since the villagers are clearly coming together because of him. Vargas declines, knowing he isn't fit for the role, but he values the friends standing by them. Ars reflects that leaving for Linda Village was the right move. They are here to protect their people, no matter the cost. They set up camp at the river south of Baruka Village, a strategic bottleneck the Fontana family must cross. Though the river isn't wide, its depth makes crossing points limited and easy to defend. Ars orders the men to use ground-leveling magic to prep the site. Using his own magic, Ars constructs enough hostels to shelter over 100 people, including the reinforcements arriving from Linda Village. Next, Ars focuses on building defensive walls. He notes that thanks to the naming ceremony, he no longer needs to teach spells individually, as his magic is shared through their new bond. The ceremony directly imprints magical knowledge into their minds. However, some struggle with the wall creation spell. It's not a lack of will, but rather their minds being unable to process the complex information. This mana bottleneck also affects road placement magic. If a spell requires more mana than a person possesses, their mind simply rejects the imprint. Ars remembers his own experience with this limitation. He once fainted trying to push past his mana capacity, proving that magic is limited by one's internal reserves. Later, Grant arrives to show Ars a new set of leather armor he's crafted. Ars is genuinely impressed by the craftsmanship, especially given the short notice. After his duel with Vargas, he knew that standing on the front lines without proper protection was a death wish. Though the armor feels a bit light, Ars knows he can't be picky. He entrusts his inner circle with the leadership of his forces, confident that his base is fortified and his men are finally equipped for the coming storm. The peddler returns with grim news. The Fontana family has mobilized 500 troops. Ars is shocked. With only 50 men from Baruka, they are outnumbered 10 to 1. The enemy clearly sees Ars as a threat that needs to be crushed. Vargas acknowledges the dire odds, noting that a siege is impossible against such numbers. Their only hope is to meet the enemy in the field. The Fontana family expects a ragtag group of farmers, not a disciplined unit of magic users. Ars tells his men they have only one shot, a high-stakes ambush. He reflects on how terms like open battle used to sound exciting in video games, but in reality, the weight of command is almost unbearable. Just then, his Valkyrie nudges him affectionately. Ars smiles, telling the others that even his loyal mount is cheering him on as they prepare for the fight of their lives. If we succeed, our legacy will live on through everyone else as they finally achieve true freedom. Ars observes the Fontana army's rigid formations, noting that their predictable tactics, based on outdated intelligence, give him a massive advantage. A Fontana representative, riding a hornless Valkyrie, steps forward to accuse Ars of defying noble authority. After being charged with harming a tax officer, the messenger declares that if Ars surrenders now, the villagers will be spared. Baito urges Ars to respond before morale wavers, and using mana to project his voice, Ars delivers a blistering retort. He exposes the Fontana family's true motive. a plot to seize Baruka and crush its people under the weight of starvation and unfair taxes. He declares that the people of Baruka will no longer bow to tyranny, calling them to fight for their future. Inspired, the villagers charge with magically enhanced strength, catching the Fontana soldiers completely off guard. Ars wields a spear forged from hardened earth, sending enemy soldiers flying with every devastating sweep. His overwhelming power shatters the morale of the conscripted troops, allowing him to tear through their front lines with ease. Ars drives deeper into the fray, keeping his eyes fixed on his ultimate target, the Fontana commander. Taking down the leader is the key to victory. Baito shouts for Ars to wait, warning him that he's overextending. Even on horseback, Ars is moving so fast that he's leaving his own army in the dust. He realizes that by combining physical enhancement with his scattershot magic, he is becoming an unstoppable force. Even as a child, his refined strength is enough to launch grown men into the air. He notices the enemy's magic is surprisingly weak, likely because he's been cultivating his mana pool since infancy, while others rely solely on the meager mana naturally found in their bodies. Ars commands Baito and Vargas to flank him, while ordering his father and Maddox to lead the main pursuit. Their objective is the armored unit at the center of the formation. Ars views himself, Baito, and Vargas as the pillars of Baruka, just as these elites are the backbone of the enemy. He knows breaking them will end the fight, but doubts scattershot can pierce full plate armor. These elites possess significantly more mana than the conscripts, making them a formidable defense. As he charges, Ars swings his spear with such force that it slips from his hand, clattering to the ground, and leaving him momentarily vulnerable. He quickly draws his sword as a fallen soldier screams at his comrades to stand their ground and not be humiliated by a child. Ars notes that while these elites are tougher than the conscripts, their mana quality is still fundamentally lacking. In contrast, Ars's mana is dense and potent, granting him immense physical power. He jokingly tells Baito they should each take down 10 men to speed things up, leaving Baito to grumble about their reckless general. Suddenly, the enemy commander unsheathes his blade and advances, claiming he underestimated the boy but that the rebellion ends here. As their blades clash, the commander reveals himself as Raymond, the head of the Fontana family, who vaguely remembers Ars from years ago. Ars recognizes Raymond instantly. There's no way he could forget the man. Raymond was the one who humiliated him by dehorning his Valkyrie, and the same man who granted him land only to try and steal it back now. To Ars, Raymond represents the ultimate greed of the nobility. Baito shouts for Ars to keep his cool and stay alert, as the armored soldiers are already beginning to regroup. Vargas notes that Raymond deliberately exposed himself to stall Ars, killing the momentum he had built up. As the armored soldiers prepare their spells, Ars is reminded that every noble possesses a unique and formidable power. This lineage-based ability grants them the right to rule, allowing them to conscript soldiers and bestow magic upon the worthy. However, for a commoner to obtain magic, the path is grueling. They must first prove their worth on the battlefield. They must become sworn warriors and serve as a knight's squire to earn approval. Any sign of weakness results in failure. Without magic, they lose their surname and face banishment. Ars reflects on how his actions in Baruka exploited this harsh system. The Baruka name symbolizes earth magic, whereas the Fontana family wields ice, which they are now casting under Raymond's command. Realizing they're completely surrounded, Ars knows he can't survive this alone, and places his trust in Baito and Vargas. He relies on his comrades to watch his back while he prepares his counter-offensive. Channeling mana into his Kuga-ken, Ars activates physical and sight enhancements, causing the world to slow as he focuses his power. He notes the enemy's ice lance functions much like his scattershot. Vargas takes the brunt of the hits, hardening his body to protect the others. Despite the relentless barrage, Vargas refuses to budge, enduring the impact to keep his allies safe. This display of unwavering resolve leaves Ars deeply impressed by his veteran comrade's grit. Ars recalls the painful moment he was forced to gift Raymond the Valkyrie. He once watched helplessly as they cut off its horns, but now he is stronger and backed by reliable comrades like Beto. Ars commends the Valkyrie's effort, then leaps from its back, just as it's struck by an ice lance, charging directly toward the enemy knights. Ars orders Vargas to cover Beto, fearing Beto's enhancements won't be enough to pierce the knight's heavy plate armor. To his shock, Beto's raw strength shatters the armor instantly, revealing a hidden power Ars had completely overlooked. With Beto drawing their fire and Vargas holding the line, Ars sees the perfect opportunity to strike down Raymond. Raymond is stunned by Ars's immense strength and his mysterious magical sword. He questions the origin of these enhancements, but Ars remains silent, sensing Raymond's overconfidence. Raymond laments that diplomacy has failed, while Ars realizes his opponent is far more than just a political figurehead. Raymond's blade surges with mana, far surpassing the Kugakin, as he declares this to be Ars's end and charges forward. His blade becomes completely encased in a freezing aura of ice. As their weapons collide, Ars's sword shatters against the sheer power of Raymond's ice spirit sword. The icy aura extends Raymond's reach, putting Ars on the defensive. Every time he manages to chip the ice, it instantly regenerates, leaving Ars in an increasingly desperate situation. Despite his mana enhancements, Ars is forced back until he's knocked from his Valkyrie. Realizing he can't outrun a horse on foot, he fires a scatter shot at Raymond's steed, successfully bringing his opponent down to equal ground. Even though Raymond is still physically stronger, Ars sees an opening, only for enemy knights to intervene and ruin his chance. Ars carves through them, frustrated by their teamwork and thick armor, yet he remains confident he can win by precisely managing his mana. Drenched in sweat after clearing the field, Ars feels the crushing weight of exhaustion, but he refuses to lower his guard. Noticing the boy's heavy breathing, Raymond steps forward, mocking Ars for finally reaching his limit. He demands a surrender to end this futile resistance, but Ars defiantly retorts that Raymond is the one who should give up. Suddenly, a massive tremor shakes the earth, and Ars smiles, revealing that Raymond has walked right into his trap. Elsewhere, the peddler leads a herd of Valkyries along the river toward the fray. Ars had long anticipated that a standard ambush wouldn't work with such limited numbers, so he prepared a far more devastating trump card. Raymond watches in horror as he realizes Ars has successfully flanked his position with a stampede of Valkyries. These beasts storm the battlefield, unleashing scattershot spells that tear through Raymond's ranks. Seeing animals wield magic identical to Ars's signature move throws the Fontana soldiers into a total panic. Within moments, the army is decimated, leaving a shell-shocked Raymond refusing to accept such a humiliating defeat. Seizing the moment of Raymond's shock, Ars lunges forward and drives his blade through the man's chest. As Raymond collapses, Ars declares the battle over, securing a decisive victory that leaves the battlefield silent. Raising his bloodied sword high, Ars announces with a booming voice that he has slain Raymond, the high-ranking representative of the Fontana family. He commands the remaining Fontana soldiers to retreat and proclaims Baruka's newfound freedom, as thunderous cheers erupt from his weary men. His loyal Valkyrie nuzzles him in relief, and Ars reassures the beast that he's unharmed before joining the triumphant celebrations at the camp. Nearby, the peddler admits he was terrified during the charge, specifically noting the danger of maintaining physical enhancement magic while riding a galloping Valkyrie at top speed. Ars reflects on his bond with the lead Valkyrie, his partner since the beginning, and commends the peddler for his bravery in guiding the charge. Though the peddler warns that Fontana still has massive reserves, Ars remains optimistic. They've seized abandoned weapons, gained 200 defectors, and most importantly secured vital intelligence. Vargas confirms the captured knights are talking, revealing that Fontana commands 5,000 conscripts and can mobilize thousands more, a force that could easily crush them in a war of attrition. Realizing they can't win through numbers alone, Ars stresses the importance of projecting overwhelming power to deter the nobles from further aggression. To establish their authority, Ars proposes building a grand castle. He plans to innovate on local architecture by adding a defensive moat fed by the nearby river. Gran agrees, outlining the need for stairways, secondary walls, and watchtowers, which Ars decides to replicate effortlessly using his memory preservation magic. With the fortress underway, Ars turns his attention to infrastructure, planning supply roads to the villages and reinforced defensive walls for Linda. He organizes the workforce into specialized teams based on their magic levels, leaving Gran stunned by the sheer efficiency of Ars's leadership and reputation. Ars playfully teases Gran's ambitions before they both vow to construct a stronghold that will leave even the highest nobles speechless. Soon, the castle stands finished, with paved roads linking the villages and a network of watchtowers providing clear sightlines across their new territory. As recruits flock to their cause, Ars receives a message from Baruka village. Father Paulo wants an audience, a request that fills Ars with a sudden sense of dread. The tension is thick as Paulo confronts Ars, warning him to stop being evasive about the naming ceremonies he's been performing without the church's permission. Paulo explains that while magic once required complex spells, the ancient Magus created the naming system to make mana accessible, a divine gift that founded the Holy Light Church. He reveals that naming establishes a parental bond that transfers mana to the parent, finally explaining why Ars's own magical power has been growing so exponentially. However, this technique is a secret guarded by the highest levels of the church, and Ars's unauthorized use of it risks inviting the wrath of the entire religious establishment. Ars panics over the potential consequences, hoping for leniency since naming ceremonies are common when promoting knights. Paolo explains that the church oversees these ceremonies to regulate mana flow and prevent hoarding, while also securing essential offerings. Ars scoffs at what sounds like a blatant cash grab, but Paolo calls it a token of gratitude. Suddenly, Ars realizes that if mana flows from child to parent, his power is likely fueling Paolo's. Paolo confirms this, admitting his mana has surged significantly ever since he performed the naming ceremony for Ars. This boost led to his promotion to bishop, granting him regional authority and unlocking the divine gift of healing magic. Seizing the opportunity, Paolo proposes a deal. Ars should entrust his entire future to him. Ars lists his crimes: killing tax collectors, inciting rebellions, and illegally occupying land. Paolo adds that he's also misused secret church magic, making the situation even more dire. Ars has a justification for the war, but no excuse for the unauthorized naming. Joining the church is out. He'd be expelled for using offensive magic, so Paolo offers a different way out. Paolo offers to claim he personally authorized the naming of the Baruka villagers, but Ars is skeptical of his sudden generosity. Paolo admits his rank depends on Ars's mana. If Ars dies, he loses his status. Besides, a little creative reporting in church documents is a small price for a powerful ally. However, because Ars's actions were so public, he needs to provide massive alms to make the story believable. Ars reluctantly agrees to pay. Ars is floored by the exorbitant price tag, which would drain his savings. He refuses to pay unless Paolo can also settle the feud with the Fontana family. Paolo shifts focus to the Fontanas, explaining that their real fear isn't Ars. It's the mysterious rival noble they suspect is backing the rebellion. Paolo offers to convince them that no other noble is involved, framing the naming as a legitimate church act he personally sanctioned during Ars's baptism. As the new bishop of the territory, Paolo has the leverage to negotiate, but he needs Ars's donation to grease the wheels. After a moment, Ars makes his choice. He entrusts Baruka's fate to Paolo. Elsewhere, local nobles gossip about the new bishop's strange protection of a small-town rebel like Ars. They conclude that Ars must hold immense significance if the church is willing to stick its neck out to shield him. Later, Paolo arrives with news. A meeting with the Fontanas is set. They agree to meet at a neutral, secluded location for an informal negotiation. Ars clears out a roadside tower for the summit. Soon, a man approaches and asks, "So, you're Ars Baruka?" Seeing the man arrived almost alone, Ars wonders if he's being underestimated, until the stranger introduces himself as the head of the family, Carlos Fontana. Ars glances back at the bishop, regretting that he hadn't kept him in the loop. Carlos takes a seat across from the standing boy. Carlos reveals that the bishop has already filled him in on the entire situation. He offers to overlook the rebellion if Ars stops fighting, but Ars refuses to back down without making demands. Carlos is stunned that this commoner won't kneel and actually has the audacity to negotiate. He scoffs that such defiance is expected from a rebel leader before handing over the peace terms. Ars realizes the deal requires him to sever ties with the main Fontana branch, but in exchange, he'll be granted official knighthood. When Ars questions his sincerity, Carlos admits that breaking a signed treaty would cost him the loyalty of his men. Ars points out the irony of serving the man whose representative he killed, but Carlos laughs, admitting he's actually grateful Raymond is gone. He acknowledges that despite Ars's age, he's proven himself a capable leader. Carlos then reveals that since his father, the legendary Winter General, died 3 years ago, his life has been a struggle. After the nobles conspired to kill his father, Raymond of the Barbaros family seized power as a representative. While Raymond protected the territory, he also orchestrated the downfall of the prestigious Graham family to cement his rule. Raymond turned Carlos into a puppet and only gave Ars land by mistake. Carlos was actually planning to arrest Raymond himself before Ars did the job for him. Now, Carlos is struggling to keep Raymond's remaining loyalists in check before they inevitably revolt, and he wants Ars to be the one to crush that eventual rebellion. Carlos admits his position is fragile, and he needs the Baruka family's strength. He recognizes Ars doesn't have the soul of a simple farmer. He is a man with something to protect who won't be intimidated by mere status. He offers to guarantee the safety, wealth, and freedom of Ars's people, provided Ars becomes his ultimate weapon. Ars realizes that while Carlos's power is shaky, a lord's word is still law. Refusing now would also insult Bishop Paolo, so he agrees to the deal, though he insists on adding a few conditions of his own. The secret negotiations between the two leaders continue deep into the night. Finally, Bishop Paolo presents the formal treaty, and both men swear their oaths. Ars vows to serve Carlos, while Carlos pledges to treat Ars as a true knight and brother-in-arms for the sake of the people. To seal the bond, Ars kneels before his new lord, who draws his sword to perform the naming ceremony. As Paolo activates the naming circle, Carlos officially dubs him Ars von Baruka. Carlos welcomes his new knight, and as the mana bond settles, Ars feels their combined power surge. This connection bolsters Carlos's authority, helping him suppress the remnants of Raymond's faction. But the bond also grants Ars and his followers a massive upgrade: the ability to wield the Fontana family's signature ice magic. After being limited to earth magic for so long, this new power is a game changer. With the conflict finally resolved, Ars can finally return to his normal life. Back at home, Ars relaxes in his chair as Gran stands nearby, asking the young lord what his next move will be now that he officially owns the land. Ars ponders the situation. Gran mentions that not only did Ars secure Baruka and Linda, but he even managed to keep North River Castle. Ars recalls how Carlos initially only wanted to give him Baruka, but after a fierce argument, he refused to let Vargas or North River Castle go, and Carlos finally relented. Ars reflects that while he's now a knight, very few actually hold their own territory, making him genuinely shocked that Carlos agreed to the deal. Gran clarifies that this was more of a necessity than a gift, asking if Ars understands the true reason. Ars responds immediately, explaining that he needs to start turning a profit, as he can't afford to get lost in Gran's fantasies. While he has the right to rule, tax, and judge, these powers come with heavy burdens. Ars realizes he must pay taxes to the Fontana family and provide military levies upon request. But currently, he doesn't even have the resources to feed his own men. Failing to show loyalty could mean losing the territory he worked so hard to secure. Ars concludes that he needs to establish passive income streams immediately and decides it's time to restructure his internal administration. The scene shifts to a noblewoman named Lilina, lost in a book. When a servant asks if something is bothering her, Lilina simply brushes it off and asks for the next volume. As the servant leaves, Lilina reflects on the chaos. Raymond, who had protected the land since their youth, was killed in a peasant uprising. She acknowledges Carlos's talent for management, but worries that the veteran knights of the Raymond faction will resent being ruled by the inexperienced Carlos. Knowing how calculating Carlos is, Lilina assumes he'll use her, his only remaining blood relative, as a political tool to maintain stability. Resigned to her fate, she prepares for the challenges ahead. The scene then shifts back to Ars in a meeting, where he's outlining roles and responsibilities. He assigns the merchant, Osan, to handle internal affairs alongside him. Since Osan is literate and skilled in mathematics, he'll be in charge of the accounting. Ars appoints Beto and Vargas to serve as his captains. Recognizing that a standing army requires massive funding, Ars decides they will focus on training the local peasantry for the time being. Security is entrusted to his father. He plans to hire a peacekeeping force and intends to implement a straightforward 3 strikes rule to maintain order and discipline. Ars warns his father that some people are using offensive magic even during peacetime, and he needs them kept in check. He acknowledges it's a grueling task, but urges his father to do his best, leaving the old man feeling the weight of the pressure. Maddox and the village chiefs of Baruka and Linda will serve as judges. If a dispute can't be settled privately, a trial will be held. Since there are no formal laws yet, Ars needs authority figures who can deliver fair judgments that both sides can respect. Over time, he plans to use these precedents to establish a legal code. Meanwhile, Gran will remain in charge of crafting, though Ars knows he'll need to keep a close eye on the eccentric inventor. Lastly, Ars wants to personally hire people for specialized tasks. During the road construction, he noticed several individuals who didn't just follow orders, but suggested brilliant improvements. Despite their lack of formal education, they are incredibly intelligent. Ars plans to push every capable person to their limit for the sake of the Baruka knighthood. By using meditation to bypass the need for rest, the Black Company Baruka is born. Seeing this level of efficiency, Osan calls Ars a total monster. The very first thing Ars does is seize all of Osan's funds. Since he's completely broke after paying off the church, Ars pressured Osan to invest. Even Bishop Paulo was stunned by how much Ars had saved. Ars tells Osan that if they do business together, they'll both get rich. He offers Osan prime land as an incentive, and Osan eventually agrees, viewing it as a valuable donation to his new lord. Despite the progress, Osan worries if Ars can truly handle the pressure. Ars explains that rising from a commander to a noble is a political minefield. His relationship with Carlos is purely transactional, and other nobles are just waiting for him to fail so they can seize his land. Simply surviving isn't enough. He needs to turn the Baruka knighthood into the most powerful force in the region. To fund this, he suggests opening a massive market. A shocked Osan points out that nobody in their right mind would travel this far into the sticks just to trade. Nobles are constantly squabbling with their neighbors, making simple travel a nightmare. Every territory has its own checkpoints and exorbitant fees, and dealing with the guilds is an even bigger hassle as they charge for everything. If you even think about conducting business without their approval, the guilds will have you erased. Ars counters that this system stifles the movement of goods and inflates prices, which is a recipe for disaster. If no money flows into the Baruka knighthood, he'll be in serious trouble. His solution is to create a free market where people can trade without guild interference. Baito remains skeptical, noting that merchants still have to pay fees in every territory they cross just to get there. Ars acknowledges this reality, drawing on his extensive trading experience in this world. Nevertheless, he is determined to build a city and a system where merchants will gather of their own accord. Ars is brimming with determination to see this vision through. The first step is creating an easy passage from Fontana City, so Ars begins construction on a road to Baruka village. He notes that building a bridge over the river was actually part of the peace terms. This allows him to kill two birds with one stone. Baito, supervising the work, asks if the terms specified a road for merchants. Ars explains that Fontana views this as a military road, meaning they're still incredibly suspicious and could use it to mobilize forces at any time. Ars knows Baito is right. Another condition is keeping the garrison at North River Castle to a minimum, a point he fought hard over during negotiations with Carlos. He doesn't want to get on Carlos's bad side, so he plans to turn North River Castle into an in-town connecting Fontana City and Baruka village. Ars ordered farmers with magic to expand their fields while others worked the roads. Within days, the path significantly reducing travel time between Baruka village and Fontana City was finished. With such skilled labor, construction was a breeze, and Ars praised their efficiency. However, the project's end left many workers, younger sons with no inheritance or those out of money, worried about their future. Ars realized that as a lord, he must ensure everyone has a way to eat. Providing housing and employment isn't just charity. It's essential for maintaining peace and reducing crime. Ars offered these men a chance. He invited the workers to settle permanently in Baruka village. Having already cleared land and built lodgings outside the 4-kilometer wall, he prepared two main industries for them. The first was the production of hardened bricks. Since the materials, giant boar tusks and Valkyrie horns, are rare, these specialized bricks would become a signature product of Baruka village. The second venture was cultivating magical mushrooms. By providing ample mana, these mushrooms yield massive harvests and can be grown on reusable logs. The workers were deeply grateful as Ars welcomed them into the fold. While he initially wanted to keep the lucrative mushroom business for himself, Ars knew sharing the wealth was better for long-term stability. With potential wars on the horizon, a prosperous village ensures his own survival, even if it means sacrificing some immediate profit. This added another specialty product to Baruka's exports. Next, Ars turned his attention to the farmers, beginning a land survey to assess size and estimate crop yields, which he explained in detail to Baito. Baito, never one for intellectual labor, decided to sit this one out. Ars agreed, knowing the survey wasn't his style. With magical land leveling and soil enrichment, the harvest was set to explode, which meant a likely tax hike. The survey's true goal was to calculate the productivity of every field, subtly signaling the coming tax burden. However, Ars was hesitant to raise taxes during his very first year of leadership. He puzzled over how to measure the land, until Carl suggested using the number of leveling spells cast as a metric. Since each spell covered exactly a 10-meter square, it was a brilliant solution that allowed for precise measurements without any specialized equipment. They established that in Barcania, 1 acre would equal a single casting of the spell. Ars couldn't help but notice Carl's dedication. Ever since the battle with Raymond, the boy had been plagued by guilt over past mistakes. To make amends, Carl was working tirelessly to be useful. Next, Ars moved to standardize measurements. He defined a meter as 1/10 of the spell's side, dividing it into 100 centimeters. From there, he established volume and weight. A 10-centimeter cube became a liter, which weighed exactly 1 kilogram. He even set water's boiling point at 100 degrees, though he knew the locals would need time to adjust. To help them along, he planned to distribute reference tables. He tasked Carl with spreading the word, confident in the boy's perfect memory. And so, Barcania adopted a measurement system that felt very familiar to Ars. As the survey began, Ars hit a major snag. He had no paper to record his findings. The locals relied on cumbersome sheepskin parchment, which was far from ideal for a massive survey of the entire region. Ars needed something affordable and efficient. Since the local timber wasn't good for charcoal or mushrooms, he had a better idea. Ars decided to manufacture his own plant-based paper. Despite the initial failures and the skepticism of those watching him, Ars refused to give up. He refined his process, carefully boiling the mixture. At lower temperatures while experimenting with various adhesive pastes, he eventually perfected a recipe using local wood, mana recovery potions to break down the fibers, and pseudo-yams for glue. Ars whittled and crushed the wood, boiling it with the potions to extract the pulp. He then blended the fibers with the yam paste and began the straining process. He poured the mixture through a coarse cloth and pressed it between layers to dry. Days later, he held a thin, sturdy sheet of paper that was incredibly easy to write on. Not only was the survey saved, but even the skeptics were stunned. Osen, once a doubter, was so impressed that he begged Ars to sell him the new material. Seeing the potential for both administration and trade, Ars decided to scale up production. The paper was lightweight and convenient, making it a guaranteed bestseller. This gave Ars another idea. He would staff his new paper mill with the region's widows. It was a way to provide for these struggling families, giving them a steady income outside of grueling farm work. Though many of the women still avoided eye contact with their new lord, one eventually stopped to thank him, proving that his efforts to ease their burdens were finally being recognized. With paper production settled, Ars focused on upgrading the Valkyrie's gear. Recalling his skirmish with Raymond, he realized that saddles and stirrups were the key to tactical stability during the heat of battle. He began designing specialized gear that would make riding effortless, even for those who weren't natural-born horsemen. By providing a secure foothold, he was laying the groundwork for a true cavalry unit, a move that would rewrite their history and drastically bolster their military might. He realized that horseshoes were essential, as the Valkyrie's hooves wore down much faster in civilization than in the wild. After observing the size differences between his hand-raised mounts and those born from horned Valkyries, Ars realized a universal horseshoe design could be mass-produced with magic. He used hardened bricks to prototype various shapes until he found a design suited for all terrains. Once perfected, he finally incorporated the design into a specialized construction spell. In his past life, modern preservation methods allowed people to eat well year-round. But in this world, the harvest season is the only time anyone is truly full. Even with soil magic boosting yields, the surplus simply rots without proper storage. Even the existing Baruka storehouse is primitive, leaving the crops to spoil quickly. That changes today. Ars constructs a new facility and presents it to Baito and Gran, explaining that this structure will preserve their harvest indefinitely. Baito remains skeptical, mocking the building for looking like a giant block of tofu. But Ars explains that its airtight walls are 3 times thicker than a standard building. He then swings open the heavy doors and begins conjuring massive ice lances to fill the interior. Baito watches in shock, questioning if such a display of magic is even necessary. Ars explains that they need an immense amount of ice to keep the temperature stable, and asks Baito and Gran to assist him. They work together to fill the chamber with frozen spears until the room is packed. To prevent melting, Ars covers the ice in a thick layer of sawdust, completing his makeshift freezer room. Baito shivers from the intense cold, while Gran realizes that crops stored here will never spoil. Ars recalls that before the age of electricity, people used similar ice boxes to preserve their food. He considers selling smaller ice boxes to families, providing them with ice even if they lack the magic to create it themselves. This would stabilize the food supply, preserving everything from vegetables to surplus meat from large hunts. As they step outside, Ars reflects on how food is the true foundation of his power, only for Gran to suddenly suggest building a castle. Ars ponders the idea, realizing he spends all his time in Baruka rather than Northriver Castle. While a lord without a fortress is unusual, he finds it more efficient to work here, especially since Northriver is barely occupied. However, Gran insists that a new castle is essential for displaying his authority and ensuring a smooth transition of power. Ars acknowledges the logic but worries that building a grand fortress so soon after the Raymond conflict might make him look arrogant. Gran counters that while those on the battlefield have seen Ars's true strength, those who weren't there might still see him as just a kid and resist paying taxes. Ars realizes he needs a grand symbol of power to maintain order, deciding that this new castle should be even more impressive and decorative than Northriver. Gran is visibly thrilled at the prospect, though Ars teases him, suspecting the old man just wants an excuse for another massive construction project. While it isn't urgent, Ars decides to build the castle gradually while managing his other duties. Currently, Northriver is the only landmark in the Baruka knightdom, but with the lord always absent, it lacks presence. A grand castle in Baruka would serve as a beacon for the territory, though Ars still worries if merchants will actually show up for his planned free market. He knows he could be summoned to war at any moment, so he must bolster his forces to ensure his survival. To do this, he needs to attract settlers. Ars tells Gran that a castle alone isn't enough. They need to build the heart of the knightdom around it. He plans to establish a proper castle town. Although he originally wanted to keep the area within the walls for himself, he knows he must open it up. He believes that by transforming the inner city into a palatial district, people will be desperate to settle there. As the population grows, merchants will follow, turning the area into a bustling trade hub. If the citizens feel safe and proud of their homes, they will be more willing to fight by his side. Inviting people to live within the walls brings massive strategic advantages, so he begins planning the development of the land between the inner and outer fortifications. The southern sector, where Baito and Gran currently reside, will be designated as the Free Market District. With plenty of space remaining, Ars plans to divide the rest of the land in the southern and western squares into individual plots to sell to new settlers. Once he adds doors and windows, the homes will be move-in ready. Meanwhile, the northeastern forest will be utilized for logging and charcoal production, fueling the town's growth. The city will also facilitate papermaking and magic mushroom farming. The northwest is reserved for Hotska fields, the primary food source for the Valkyries, though Ars also plans to include an open field for military training. Although he isn't ready for a standing army, designating the West Gate for military use will streamline future mobilizations. For now, the peacekeepers led by his father will be stationed there, alongside a new jail and courthouse. While Ars will judge major crimes personally, he intends to leave minor disputes to the village elders. Every building within the walls will be constructed from hardened brick as he continues to redevelop the southern quarter. Witnessing the transformation, Osan is left speechless, remarking that he's never seen a town so advanced. Ars poured his soul into the city's development, proudly noting that his creation had finally surpassed the grandeur of Fontana City. The sophisticated grid layout showcased a level of urban planning rarely seen in this world. With elegant arches, glass windows, and gleaming brickwork, the city exuded luxury. Osan was particularly impressed by how Ars used a memory preservation spell to perfectly replicate intricate architectural details from his own home. Ars was confident that his work would stun any visitor. Next, he turned his attention to the external defenses. While the original walls could stop a charging boar, they needed upgrades to repel human invaders. Since making the entire wall from hardened brick was too costly, he reinforced the existing structure with stairs and massive watchtowers to provide superior coverage. Following the defensive model of his previous fortifications, he placed Baito and Vargas in charge of the ramparts. Gran also contributed, designing a system where stored bricks could be rained down on attackers, a resource-efficient tactic for a city with limited weaponry. To finish it off, a wide moat and 4 drawbridges were expertly crafted by the local lumberjacks. Later, standing alongside Maddox, Ars observed the completed defenses. Maddox was impressed by their ability to raise the drawbridges at a moment's notice, allowing them to withstand a prolonged siege if necessary. Thinking of the tactical advantage of casting spells from the heights, Ars felt a surge of pride at the birth of Barocania, a true fortress city serving as the heart of the Barca domain. Suddenly, the demand for glass skyrocketed as merchants, seeing it used throughout the city, became desperate to get their hands on it. Though frustrated that glass hadn't sold well initially, Ars saw the profit potential and considered mass production. However, Gran cautioned him, noting that while bricks are uniform, glass is versatile. If they only focused on windows, they might miss out on the artistry of crafting drinking glasses and plates. Inspired by Gran's insight, Ars realized that overstandardizing might stifle creativity, so he suggested a new project, the creation of optical lenses, a challenge Gran accepted with pure excitement. Amidst the chaos of development, Ars finally took a moment to relax over tea with Hector. They discussed plans for the inner walls and the castle interior, which were meant to serve as ultimate symbols of his power. Ars admitted he was still undecided on the final aesthetic. Their peace was soon interrupted by a heated argument between Baito and Vargas over whether the city should focus on offensive or defensive tactics. Ars urged them to remain calm, knowing that a balance of both perspectives was vital for the city's survival. The scene shifts to the group gathered at a table, where Ars apologizes to Hector for the trouble of brewing tea. Hector waves it off, noting he was already making some. Baito stubbornly concludes that they can't win without attacking, while Vargas maintains that their strength lies in their ability to build unshakable fortifications. Ars reflects on Baito's obsession with aggression, realizing the trauma of the battle against the Fontana army still lingers. He remembers the suffocating atmosphere of the battlefield where lives were at stake, recalling how his own fear nearly drove him to make reckless mistakes. Ars realizes Baito likely shares this reckless mindset, especially after surviving against a superior force. Baito attributes their success solely to their head-on charges. But while he's strong, he lacks the experience to see the flaws in that strategy. Ars knows their victory wasn't a true triumph. They simply survived a desperate gamble. He refuses to blindly charge into battle again, especially when the odds are stacked so heavily against them. Vargas's suggestion for a defensive strategy also feels wrong. He argues they should focus on training to utilize their castle for defense. But Ars views a siege as a death trap. He knows his position is too fragile. As an upstart knight, he's despised by the Fontana retainers, specifically the Raymond faction, who view him as a total nuisance. If they were besieged, no one would come to their rescue. Even Carlos's position is too unstable to risk helping them. They simply aren't equipped for a protracted war of attrition. The other knights loathe them, and they could be sacrificed as pawns at any moment. Their only choice is to rely on their own strength to survive. Every soldier needs to be elite, capable of making split-second decisions to keep their comrades alive. Each man must possess the tactical mind of a squad captain. Some express concern that this standard is unrealistic, but Ars insists it's their only path to survival. As the meeting concludes, Ars reflects on the daunting task ahead. He finally understands what the Baruka army needs to become. But the real challenge is how to make it a reality. While he's focused on the economy and city planning, he can't afford to neglect the military. Overhearing his thoughts, Hector asks if Ars dreams of conquest and power. Startled, Ars quickly denies it. He only wants to protect his land and status, admitting his fear of war and his desire for peace, a sentiment deeply rooted in his memories of a world without conflict. He tells Hector he just wants to farm and enjoy good food in peace. Hector agrees, but Ars knows a pacifist life is a luxury this war-torn world won't easily grant. Soon he is back in the fields, training his men. He watches his soldiers, knowing that their grueling training is the only thing that will keep them alive on the battlefield. Phase 1 begins with Valkyrie riding. By introducing saddles and stirrups, the recruits are finally able to mount the hornless creatures, though they still require physical enhancement spells to stay seated. The strain causes agonizing muscle aches, but it's nothing a little meditation can't soothe. Once they master the saddle, they move forward. The next challenge is mastering the scattershot spell while mounted. Handling a weapon while riding is incredibly difficult, so they begin with magical projectiles. They focus on precision with their initial shots before graduating to the far more powerful ice lance. Their greatest asset is their massive stable of Valkyries, and Ars is determined to build a fighting style around them. He's training magical soldiers to ride hornless Valkyries while executing precision strikes on his command, allowing them to pick off enemies from a safe distance. He's confident that a concentrated barrage of ice lances could even bring down a great boar. Their live-fire exercises are proving successful, with Ars's own Valkyrie leading the charge. Even with novice riders, the flock maintains a perfect formation. Under such expert leadership, the entire unit moves as if it were a single deadly organism. This marks the birth of the Baruka army's elite magic cavalry. Suddenly, the scene shifts as Gran excitedly reveals his latest masterpiece, urging Ars to feast his eyes on his new creation. Ars notices that Gran looks like a total mess, unshaven and clearly sleep-deprived. Gran brushes it off, claiming his meditation magic keeps him energized. But Ars knows that while the spell helps, it's no true substitute for actual sleep. Still, he's eager to test their new invention from the top of the tower. The device turns out to be a pair of binoculars, capable of zooming in on distant objects by refracting light through multiple lenses. Ars admits he doesn't understand the physics well enough to replicate the effect with magic, but as he peers through them, he can clearly see his mother hanging laundry miles away. He hands the device back to Gran, praising the incredible craftsmanship. Gran takes pride in never doing anything half-heartedly, and Ars realizes that despite his messy sketches, Gran's engineering talent is truly world-class. He feels a wave of gratitude for having Gran in Baruka. Later, as the winter chill sets in and the snow begins to fall, Ars and his younger brother settle in for some hot tea, enjoying a rare moment of domestic peace. Ars reflects on how these leisurely days will vanish once the next war begins. Fortunately, the year ended without Carlos making any unreasonable demands. While the Baruka army was summoned several times, they were never sent into direct combat. Their utility was far more valuable. By constructing perfect roads and massive 10-meter walls overnight, they forced most rebels to surrender before a single sword was even drawn. There were a few exceptions, but with the new infrastructure, Carlos was able to rout the opposition with ease. Each time they were summoned, Fontana's logistics and defenses improved significantly. Ars even convinced Carlos to waive passage fees in the former rebel territories, though he could tell the Lord felt like his arm was being twisted. Regardless, the economic impact was undeniable. The cities across Fontana were thriving like never before. Because of that prosperity, even the Baruka knighthood on the northern edge began to see a steady influx of merchants and travelers. However, the flow of goods and the military summons both came to a halt when winter arrived. As the region hunkered down to hibernate on their food stocks, Ars mentioned to Carl how much he missed taking a proper bath, a concept Carl didn't even recognize. Ars explains the joy of soaking in hot water, but since everyone uses purification magic to stay clean, the idea doesn't click for them. He realizes he's been so busy managing the territory's exhausting finances that he forgot how much he missed life's simple comforts. Suddenly, his Valkyrie appears at the window, beckoning him outside. She signals for him to climb on, and he obliges. The Valkyrie then leads him deep into the wilderness to a hidden hot spring. It turns out she had discovered the geothermal source during a previous battle near the river. Ars is thrilled, touched that his mount remembered his interest in hot springs. As he soaks his feet, he realizes that a natural spa would be a massive draw for travelers and locals alike. Excitedly, he returns to the village and tells Vargas he wants to build an inn. They begin laying brick pipes underground to channel the hot water to the village while keeping it warm, but the overeager farmers end up digging a massive open pool instead of a private tub. Pivoting quickly, Ars turns it into a luxurious Western-style open-air bath. He even adds a drainage system that channels the overflow to fill the city's moat. This adds another layer of defense to the city, while providing a place for the people to relax. Over tea, Ars tries to explain the fascination of hot springs to Carl, noting how they soothe physical fatigue. Carl counters that meditation magic does the same thing, leaving Ars scrambling for reasons to justify the project. He desperately wants Carl to see him as a brilliant visionary rather than a guy who went through all this trouble just for a soak. Later, Ars proudly unveils his next project to Vargas, a massive greenhouse. By utilizing the steam from the hot springs, he finally perfected a concept that had previously failed because glass alone couldn't trap enough heat. With the geothermal warmth, the structure stays heated even through the freezing nights. Ars encourages the villagers to start growing crops there, potentially revolutionizing their food security during the harsh winter months. Reflecting on the Valkyrie's role, Ars felt truly grateful for her loyalty and unique gifts. Her resilience was unmatched, enduring both the scorching hot springs and the freezing winter with ease. Soon, a reminder came that it was time to move. The winter months weren't just for survival. They offered a rare chance for lucrative trade. With fresh Hatsuka grown in his greenhouses, Ars could transport the crops by sleigh to Fontana City. Though the taste was mediocre, its value skyrocketed during the winter scarcity, proving that their hard work was finally paying off. In a season where many struggled with starvation, these vegetables were a literal lifeline. It was a grim reality that many families were forced to reduce the number of mouths to feed, making fresh produce an unthinkable luxury. The trade became an instant success, and Ars spent the rest of the winter acting as a delivery man for his people, ensuring the project's success. This served as his first major achievement of the new year as the Lord of Barricania. However, he still had to fulfill the traditional customs of the land. Every knight was required to greet the Lord who dubbed them at the start of the year, so Ars made his way to Fontana Castle. In the Hall of Lords, he stood at the very back of the line, steeling himself for the long wait as the newest addition to their ranks. At the subsequent dinner party, the atmosphere was thick with judgment. The other knights gossiped openly, mocking him as the rumored farmer knight, and dismissing him as nothing more than a child. They couldn't believe Raymond had lost to such a vulgar brat, who spent his winter peddling vegetables. Ars realized that while knighthood was meant to be based on merit, the reality was that most knights were privileged aristocrats who looked down on commoners. Surrounded by the upper class, Ars felt like a complete outsider in this den of nobles. Despite being knighted by Lord Carlos himself, no one would give him the time of day. They whispered about his unusual magic and his ability to build enchantments instantly, suspecting he was a spy for another noble family. No one dared to confront him directly because of his combat record, but the remnants of Raymond's faction were clearly looking for trouble. Ars decided his best move was simply to ignore their petty glares. Bored, he began scanning the room's mana. He noticed a clear distinction. The true veterans had refined, high-quality mana despite their low reserves, likely forged through life-or-death experience. In contrast, Raymond's cronies were lacking in both quality and quantity. As Ars considered adding mana training to his own men's routine, his gaze fell upon a mysterious girl who stood out from the crowd. She didn't look like a warrior, yet her mana quality was the highest he had ever witnessed. Strangely, her energy wasn't spread across her body. It was all concentrated in one place. Intrigued, Ars approached and called out to her, causing her to jump in surprise. He wondered if her unique mana distribution was natural or the result of specialized training, as it was all centered around her head. Overwhelmed by curiosity, he began peppering her with questions about her name and origin. Startled by his intensity, she hesitantly asked for some personal space. Ars tried to apologize for his awkwardness, just as Lord Carlos himself approached them. Carlos smirks, teasing Ars for boldly hitting on a woman the moment the new year began. He jokes that great men have great desires, ribbing Ars for flirting with a server before even saying hello. The entire hall turns to stare as whispers erupt around them. Ars tries to defend himself, insisting his interest was purely academic due to something strange he noticed about her. It wasn't because she was a woman, but Carlos just laughs it off, noting that Lilina clearly made an impression regardless. He orders Lilina to escort Ars to a private room and keep him company. Lilina protests in a fluster, but Carlos playfully insists, telling her she spends far too much time buried in books and needs to learn how to entertain a guest. Ars, seeing her discomfort, feels a twinge of guilt. Once they reach the private room, Ars takes a seat while Lilina serves him tea. To break the ice, he asks how she knows Lord Carlos. Lilina reveals that they are actually related by blood, a fact that catches Ars off guard. Ars asks if they're siblings, noting that they treat each other more like strangers than family. Lilina explains the divide. Carlos was born to the Lord's wife, while she was the daughter of a maid. Ars realizes they are half-siblings, which explains the distance between them. Their hair color is identical, yet the similarities end there. Unlike Carlos, she doesn't radiate ambition or aggression. Instead, Lilina is quiet and reserved. While Carlos is handsome enough, Lilina possesses an ethereal, otherworldly beauty that makes her look like a masterpiece. Curious, Ars asks why a woman of her status was waiting tables. Lilina explains that it's a tradition for women of noble or knightly houses to serve guests to learn proper etiquette. However, since she spent her entire life secluded in her room reading, this was actually her very first time performing the duty. Clearly embarrassed by her lack of experience at 16, she quickly pivots the conversation back to him, asking what he really wanted to discuss. Ars explains that he was analyzing the mana of everyone in the hall, and the way hers was concentrated in her head was impossible to ignore. He asks if she was trained, but Lilina is baffled. She's never even heard of mana being localized in specific body parts. Ars realizes that by focusing mana in the brain, she has inadvertently boosted her cognitive functions to an extreme degree. For comparison, a warrior like Reitz strengthens his entire body by spreading mana evenly, while someone like Vargas focuses it on his skin for impenetrable defense. By concentrating it in her head, Lilina has likely enhanced her memory, judgment, and processing speed. It's an unconscious habit, but her mana quality is so high it actually surpasses the elite knights in the hall. It seems her natural talent, combined with her daily reading, has created a feedback loop of mental growth. Ars likens it to how his own mana improves through his unique tasks. When he asks what she reads, Lilina admits books are a luxury. She mostly studies dense historical texts that take months to fully grasp. Ars understands, knowing that the cost of parchment alone makes every book a small fortune. He reflects on how formal letters to nobles are often stuffed with needlessly complex compliments. While Ars is literate, he finds classical texts nearly impossible to navigate without a dictionary. They might as well be written in a different language. He then asks if Lilina would be willing to summarize one of her history books for him in a way that's easier to digest. Lilina is surprised by the request, but Ars nudges her along with a specific question. He wants to know about the downfall of the royal family that once held the nobility together. Lilina agrees to give him a history lesson. She starts with the geography of their world, describing the natural barriers that once kept their nation isolated from the rest of the continent. Surrounded by towering peaks, dense forests, and treacherous swamps, the land enjoyed a long era of peace. That changed when a powerful wizard finally united the warring territories, establishing the royal bloodline. This founder was a magical prodigy who used a sacred naming ceremony to bind other wizards to his will. By siphoning mana from his subordinates, he achieved a level of power that was passed down through the crown. This was the birth of the monarchy, supported by the noble houses descended from those original wizards. However, Lilina explains that as the generations passed, the quality of the rulers began to rot. Eventually, a tyrant named King Nero took the throne. He possessed absolutely no magical talent of his own, relying entirely on the mana stolen from his subjects. When the nobility rebelled, Nero ordered a ruthless purge, but this only backfired by severing his access to the vital mana they provided. Ars points out that as the last of his bloodline, Nero must have bled a staggering amount of power during those internal purges. Lilina confirms that Nero lost the Grand Spell, an ancient magic capable of wiping out entire cities. Without the mana to fuel it, the nobles no longer feared him, and his royal authority crumbled into nothing more than a title. This power vacuum sparked endless civil wars among the lords, leaving Ars fascinated by how mana dictates the geopolitical landscape. Lilina explains that the church also intervened by banning offensive spells to prevent anyone from seizing the throne, prompting a chuckle from Ars. He finds Nero's blunt nickname in the history books hilarious, though Lilina suspects historians added it for dramatic flair. As Ars admires her passion for literature, a knock at the door reveals her younger brother. A young man named Lion enters the room. Lilina introduces Ars to Lion, who is already well aware of his reputation, leading Ars to question their complicated family tree. It turns out they share a mother, but while Lion's father is the current husband, Lilina is actually Lord Carlos's daughter. Lion immediately begins teasing his sister, noting he's never seen her so comfortable around a man, leaving her flustered and blushing. Ars watches their sibling dynamic with a smile, realizing they are quite close. Before Lion departs, he asks Ars to look after his sister, a request Ars is happy to fulfill given the fascinating lessons she provides. Later, Lord Carlos drops a bombshell. Ars is to be married, with the ceremony planned for the coming spring. Stunned by the sudden news, Ars learns that Lion has already given his blessing to entrust Lilina's future to him. Reflecting on their earlier conversation, Ars realizes that Lion's casual comments were actually a formal entrustment of his sister's life. He recalls Lilina's own hesitant attempts to broach the subject, realizing he was the only person completely oblivious to the arrangement. When Ars protests that he's far too young, Carlos dismisses it, stating that 10 is the standard age for noble engagements. Bewildered by these high society expectations, Ars recognizes this as a strategic political alliance designed to cement his status. He then asks about Lilina's parents. Ars learns they have passed away, though Carlos makes it clear that their approval wouldn't have mattered anyway. Lilina has always known her life would be used as a bargaining chip, but Carlos admits other suitors would have stripped away her freedom to read. This is why Lion chose Ars, to protect her happiness. With the weight of the decision looming, Carlos demands an immediate answer. Later, while riding his mount, Ars realizes Carlos's bluntness actually stems from a place of genuine care for Lilina. He thinks back to their quiet moments in the library, realizing he's the only one who truly appreciates her passion. Now Ars has to break the news to his own family, which goes about as well as expected. His brother Baito is fuming with jealousy that Ars is marrying a princess first, vowing to become a legendary hero just to find a bride of his own. Amused by the situation, Ars wishes him luck, though he notes it's hardly a competition. While Hector and Carl offer their congratulations, their mother feels a pang of sadness at her youngest son's early marriage. Hector adds that Ars never seemed the type to settle down. In fact, he'd been a loner since childhood. Ars explains that while he's only 10 and romance isn't a priority, the arrangement is a massive win for Barcania. Liliana is kind, and the union secures the resources needed to finish the castle Gran is so obsessed with. Beto teases Ars about his habit of building without permits, though Ars knows this time he must be more diplomatic. The goal is to make the new Barcania castle lavish without overshadowing Lord Carlos. Ars had already smoothed over any concerns by promising to build a residence worthy of Liliana Fontana. With this approval, he can finally add some artistic flair. He begins brainstorming how to convey true authority, deciding against a massive skyscraper that would be a nightmare to maintain, even with purification spells. Instead, he envisions something imposing yet sacred, a structure that radiates divine respect. Drawing on memories of cathedrals and deities from his past life, Ars wonders if he can use light to give the new castle an aura of celestial majesty. Later, Ars shares his vision with Gran, suggesting they use glass to make the fortress truly unique. He points out that their glass production is already in high demand, and incorporating it into the design would be a masterstroke. Gran is skeptical, arguing that a castle made of ordinary windows would look fragile and bizarre. Ars clarifies that he's talking about stained glass, instantly piquing Gran's curiosity. He explains that when visitors enter for an audience, the light will filter through the glass to create a shimmering halo effect behind him. This vibrant display wouldn't just be beautiful, it would serve as a constant reminder of his power. As Ars sketches the design, it begins to look more like a grand cathedral than a traditional fort. To tie it all together, he chooses a deep blue motif, the color of mana, to evoke a sense of reverence and strength. Soon, Gran presents the blueprints based on Ars's sketches. As Ars and Carl review them, Ars notes that the building's appearance will shift with the sun's angle, requiring precise orientation. While Gran worries about the glass being a defensive weak point, Ars suggests relying on heavy outer walls and a secret escape passage, an idea Gran wholeheartedly approves of. Ars maps out the interior, private quarters, staff housing, meeting rooms, and the grand audience hall. He's already prepared high-quality bricks using labor from the winter months when the farmers were idle. With Gran handling the primary construction, the project is ready to move forward. While Gran builds, Ars focuses on the stained glass. To test his vision, he creates a detailed miniature model of the hall, complete with functional glass inserts. He's satisfied with the result, and Carl is blown away by the level of detail in the tiny replica. Ars muses that these models could even be sold as luxury toys for noble children or high-end art pieces for collectors. Carl asks if the full-size castle will follow the same design. Ars confirms that once Gran finishes the main structure, he will personally install the massive glass panes. Carl points out that Ars could just use his magic to build the whole thing instantly, just like he did with the model. Stunned by the obvious solution, Ars thanks his brother for the reminder, realizing he can finish the entire project way ahead of schedule. Carl can only shake his head, amused that his brilliant brother sometimes misses the simplest answers. The scene shifts to Ars welcoming Leon to the newly finished Barkania castle. He reflects on how far they've come, moving from a tiny territory with 2 villages to a proper stronghold fit for a princess. He shares his pride in the project with Leon, Liliana's brother. However, Leon humbly points out that while his sister is related to Lord Carlos, she isn't technically a princess. She is a member of the Graham family, vassals to the Fontanas, and their status has fallen significantly. Ars recalls Lord Carlos mentioning that a man named Raymond was responsible for the Graham's decline. Leon confirms this, explaining that his family once held their own knightdom and served the Fontanas for generations. Unfortunately, his father was Raymond's political rival, and after his father passed away, their lands were promptly seized and redistributed. Ars begins to suspect that Raymond might have played a darker role in Leon's father's death. He asks Leon if he has ever considered petitioning Lord Carlos to have his family's ancestral lands returned. Leon explains that while he appreciates the sentiment, too much time has passed. Their former territory is now split among several different knightly houses, making it politically impossible for Lord Carlos to simply hand it back. Lion, choosing to focus on the present, requests to serve under Ars. His ultimate goal is to revive the Graham family, and he sees battlefield achievements as the path forward. Despite his lack of combat experience, he assures Ars that he learned command and tactics from his father. Ars recognizes that Lion aims to achieve victories through tactical genius during the battles called by Carlos, earning recognition without needing his own troops. Ars agrees to the arrangement, appointing Lion as both a tactical advisor and an administrative assistant. Ars then asks if Lion is in contact with anyone from the former Graham territory who could help manage the land. Lion is taken aback, feeling honored by such a high level of trust. Ars reassures him, saying they'll be brothers soon enough, and as the older brother, it's his duty to help. Just then, Ars and Lion are startled by a heated conversation nearby. A lady is criticizing the castle's grandiose style, doubting the sanity of its creator. Gran, slightly offended, retorts, but she dismisses him, calling the design the work of someone unremarkable. Ars observes her curiously, wondering who she is, while Lion reminds her to show respect in front of Lord Ars. The lady's name is Clarice, and she immediately addresses the two with a respectful apology. She introduces herself as Lilina's personal attendant, here to oversee the wedding preparations. She mentions her disagreement with Gran, explaining that she suggested modifying the overly elaborate interior to make it more sophisticated. Ars is surprised, pointing out that Gran's craftsmanship is excellent and that the decorations were his own request. Gran, proud of his work, quickly agrees, emphasizing that these pieces are handcrafted masterpieces. Clarice acknowledges the skill but argues that the abundance of decorations makes it look like Ars is flaunting his new status. Ars realizes Clarice is subtly suggesting that the decor makes his rise to power look far too obvious. Clarice, sensing his understanding, expresses her frustration that Gran hadn't understood her intentions at all. She accuses him of disregarding the aesthetics of noble society, warning that this could make Ars a target of ridicule. Gran, though usually indifferent to opinions, is devastated by the idea of Ars being insulted. Ars reflects on the conversation, realizing that his and Gran's focus on pure functionality had limited their sense of noble aesthetics. Clarice, with a knowing smile, offers to handle the castle's interior decoration, promising that both the wedding and Ars and Lilina's future life will be spent together in a beautifully adorned space. Ars concedes, knowing the castle he and Gran built will now be shaped by Clary's vision. He recalls his promise to find work for the Gran family, starting with Lion, but notes that Clarice has already taken the lead. Later, Ars sits with Clarice, Lion, and Gran to discuss the furnishing plans. Clarice proposes inviting renowned craftsmen, Almari and Barbara, to create furniture that complements the castle's stunning stained glass centerpiece. Ars notes the tight deadline before the wedding, making custom commissions impossible. Gran offers to craft the pieces himself, but Clarice insists on masterful artistry, dismissing his suggestion. Ars then suggests a compromise, purchasing existing works by famous artisans. Clarice worries the castle's unique design makes finding matching pieces unlikely without seeing them in person, leading Ars to propose a merchant event in Barricania. He positions the event as a quality check to gauge the merchant's discernment, offering prestigious certificates to those who meet their high standards. Clarice acknowledges the appeal but remains concerned that merchants won't be able to match the distinct interior without knowing the castle's layout. Thinking ahead, Ars recalls the scale model he built of the audience hall, which perfectly captures the room's atmosphere. He proposes sharing this model with the merchants to guide their selections. Clarice is delighted by the idea and even requests a copy for Lilina. Lion advises caution, noting that revealing the castle's structure could compromise security. He suggests providing limited models to trusted merchants on a temporary basis. Ars agrees, planning to have Ozan distribute a few models selectively. While Clarice oversees the aesthetic choices, Gran, wanting to ensure practicality, insists on participating in the judging process as well. With the plan in motion, Ars reflects on the challenge of mediating between Clarice and Gran's strong clashing opinions. He hopes the event will yield high-quality furnishings, and soon, the merchant quality check is officially underway. At the event, Ars is stunned by the massive turnout, with merchants arriving in far greater numbers than anyone anticipated. Ozan explains that merchants traveled from far and wide, drawn by the chance to see the intricate model of Baruka Castle. The detailed craftsmanship and the rumors of the stunning stained glass captivated their imaginations, driving them to bring their best wares. Many believed that a knight capable of such artistry must offer substantial rewards, and the allure of the Gran family's stamp of approval turned the event into a festive gathering. Reflecting on the chaos, Ars realizes the model's true impact. What he saw as a mere dollhouse was actually a brilliant marketing tool that exceeded all expectations. Ars, Clarice, and Gran review the furniture brought by the merchants. Gran is impressed by a mechanical doll's craftsmanship, but Clarice quickly rejects it, sparking a debate. Gran refuses to allow any defective items into the castle, while Clarice insists that minor repairs could restore it to perfection. Through the combined efforts of Gran and Clarice, Baruka Castle steadily nears completion, with every detail being meticulously enhanced. They overhaul the reception area, creating a space that Ars finds far more welcoming and comfortable. However, he also realizes that nearly all his savings have been drained by these improvements. With the ceremony approaching, Ars resolves to refocus on earning money once the festivities have settled down. Later, Ars is in his office when Ozan and Maddox enter to report that the merchant quality check has finally concluded. Ars expresses his gratitude, acknowledging that, thanks to Maddox's expertise, they avoided dealing with troublesome or dishonest merchants. Maddox reflects on the effort involved, noting that merchants were judged on 3 strict criteria: quality, aesthetics, and integrity. Those meeting every requirement earned a prestigious 3-star rating. Maddox's role as a judge focused specifically on integrity, helping to identify misconduct and significantly raising the quality of trade within the free city. Ars suggests to Ozan and Maddox that they hold these quality checks regularly to maintain high standards. He realizes that while Barricania's remote location seemed like a hurdle, this event proved the importance of trade guilds in ensuring quality. Just as the castle's interior was transformed, so too were the people and goods drawn to the Baruka knightdom. On a warm spring day, Ars and Lilina finally held their wedding ceremony, surrounded by cheers and the beautiful light of the stained glass windows. The celebration lasted for 3 full days. Afterward, Ars asks Lilina if wedding ceremonies are always this exhausting, and she notes that most couples stop receiving guests after only a day or 2. It turns out Ars is simply more popular than he realized. Looking at the crowd, he sees not just friends, but merchants from the event, visitors from the hot springs, and even complete strangers. Countless commoners and farmers were drawn to the event, making it a truly grand celebration. It's a rare opportunity for the commoners to savor high-class cuisine prepared by the Graham family's finest chefs. Following tradition, every guest in attendance, noble or commoner alike, is treated to a grand feast. Bishop Paulo joins the group, expressing his delight in officiating the ceremony and noting how much easier travel has become thanks to Ars's new roads. He calls it the most divine ceremony he's ever led while marveling at the castle's stained glass. However, Paulo sternly points out that the castle town lacks a single church. Realizing he completely overlooked this necessity, Ars tries to explain that the existing church in Baruchka village should suffice for the time being, but the bishop isn't convinced. Paulo retorts that Ars cannot simply neglect the spiritual needs of his town's growing population. Ars quickly counters that land has already been set aside for a new church in the southeastern district. Pleased with this answer, Paulo offers a prayer for their happiness. As he prepares to depart, he mentions that churches in larger cities often house orphanages to care for the vulnerable. He urges Ars to include one in his plans to complete the vision for the expanding town. Following the bishop's request, Ars decides to build a church combined with an orphanage right in the heart of the castle town. A nun expresses her delight at the news, mentioning she'll be managing the new facility. Paulo confirms her duty, noting her experience helping him run the church in Baruchka. Ars even offers to use leftover castle materials for the construction, a gesture the nun deeply appreciates. After Paulo and the sister finally depart, Ars breathes a sigh of relief. Lilina comments on the bishop's bluntness, finding his honesty valuable since he's willing to point out Ars's occasional oversights. While Ars appreciates the feedback, he's wary of how easily Paulo spots his weaknesses. Beyond the church, Ars decides to expand his vision by adding a vocational school to the orphanage. He recognizes the desperate need for educated personnel as Baruchka grows and wealthy merchants begin to settle within the city walls. Ars tells Lilina about an urban legend claiming anyone who moves to Baruchka receives the Baruchka surname. However, he hesitates to grant the name to every newcomer so freely. He must remain mindful of his peace with the Fontana family and the church's strict rules regarding naming spells. To prevent the formation of slums, he decides to open a school teaching literacy and mathematics to the public. Alongside these basics, the vocational school will teach specialized crafts, ensuring the people can find stable work. Suddenly, Ars realizes he's been lost in his own thoughts and drifting away from the conversation. Ars apologizes for his distraction, but Lilina reassures him. She believes he's an exceptional lord because of his unwavering dedication to the territory and the visible improvements he's brought to the land. Reflecting on a world often defined by hardship and conflict, Lilina is moved by the peace Ars has cultivated. She admits that while nobles are often trapped in political schemes with very little freedom, she wants nothing more than to protect the happiness Ars has created. She expresses her desire to stay by his side forever, sharing in the bright future he's building. Later, Ars stands outside the church, reflecting on the weight of marriage. He initially felt it might be too soon for him, but he realizes the prospect isn't half bad. He's just grateful that his partner is Lilina. Soon, Kyle arrives, apologizing for his lateness, only to be stunned that the church and orphanage are already finished. The college, school, and vocational school are finally complete. Ars notes that while the location is a bit far from the town center, there is plenty of room for growth. He asks Carl to become a teacher, which catches the boy by surprise. Ars explains that he needs an educated staff to properly run the bureaucracy of the Baruchka territory, and that starts with a solid foundation. His primary goal is increasing the literacy rate. The people of Linda and Baruchka were originally poor farmers, so almost none of them can read or write. Having to rely on memory for everything, from reports to teaching, is inefficient and prone to mistakes. Ars plans to use memory preservation magic to help them learn, but their handwriting is so atrocious that it's nearly illegible. He even wonders if they can handle basic arithmetic, which is exactly where the school comes in. He recruits traveling merchants to teach literature and math, while village elders share local history and wisdom. To sweeten the deal, every student is treated to an all-you-can-eat lunch. Ars also tasks Carl with teaching the students how to focus mana in their heads to boost their cognitive speed. Carl has been practicing this since he was a child, and despite his lingering guilt over the battle with the nobles, he's determined to succeed. He agrees to lead the mana control lessons, and Ars even entrusts him with the important duty of supervising the lunch program. After class, Ars reflects on how responsible and hardworking Carl is for a 7-year-old, confident that the students will master mana under his guidance. However, finding a head teacher for the vocational school is proving difficult. The candidate, Gran, tells the students they should work for weeks without sleep and ignore any physical collapse. This leaves Ars feeling more than a little frustrated. He has to remind Gran to actually act like a decent teacher. Ars needs craftsmen for his famous stained glass, but more importantly, He needs someone who can specialize in crafting lenses. He wishes Gran would simply produce what he's asked for, as the man is a brilliant innovator who rarely focuses on practical output. When asked to make more binoculars, Gran complained that mass-producing the same item was boring. Ars realizes he needs reliable workers who can simply copy Gran's original designs, even if the quality is slightly lower. Later, while riding Valkyrie, Ars surveys the fields and notes that the wheat harvest is fast approaching. Vargas, looking uncharacteristically disappointed, agrees, but adds that this year's harvest is going to be absolutely overwhelming. He mentions that he passes the wheat fields every day during training and realizes the workload will be massive. Ars, confused by his reaction, asks why Vargas is so upset. Vargas explains that Vargas loathes the grueling task of threshing. He describes the agonizing process of bagging wheat and beating it just to separate the grain from the ears. Then, they must wait for a breeze to blow away the lighter chaff, finally leaving behind the heavy, usable grain. The sheer monotony is soul-crushing, and the massive scale of the field only adds to his dread. Ars empathizes, knowing his soil enhancement magic has made this year's harvest exceptionally large. He realizes that local farming techniques have stagnated for years, stunted by constant civil war and a dwindling workforce. Ars admits he's no fan of the manual labor either, so he reveals a crude thresher he designed back when he was a child. While the wooden teeth lack durability, it serves as a proof of concept. Vargas suggests using hardened bricks, and though Ars is skeptical, he's determined to innovate. He envisions a pedal-powered rotating mechanism, an idea that Vargas immediately supports. Ars decides to have Gran build a prototype while vocational students observe the process to learn the craft. Once the finished thresher is ready, Vargas puts it to the test and is absolutely stunned by its efficiency. With the work now moving at lightning speed, Ars plans to distribute several units to the people, feeling a deep sense of pride in his invention. However, he isn't finished yet. When a curious Vargas asks if he has another trick up his sleeve, Ars confirms that he's already brainstorming his next project. He knows the locals see him as a bit of an eccentric, but he doesn't mind. He's surrounded by people who believe in him, and his ultimate goal is to build a safe, prosperous home for his family. Later, Ars returns home on Valkyrie to find Lilina waiting for him, promising to continue his hard work as Lord the following day. Meanwhile, the tone shifts as Carlos dons his armor with a grim resolve. He orders his men to report even the slightest movement, declaring that they will finally reclaim Einard Hill and end their ancient feud. Back with Ars, the struggle to perfect the pedal-powered thresher was worth it. But now he's focused on upgrading the grain mills. Currently, they rely on pure muscle, and as a weary Ars lies on the ground, he struggles to figure out how to harness the wind using Gran's basic sketches. Carl finds him brooding and checks in. When Ars asks about his classes, Carl notes that the students are remarkably fast learners, which Ars attributes to Carl's excellent teaching. Ars then lays out his vision for a windmill, a system where the wind drives massive sails, turning axles and cogs to grind grain automatically. Since Baracania lacks the rushing rivers found at North River Castle, they must rely on the wind instead. The main issue is the wind's unpredictability, but Carl offers a brilliant low-tech solution. Don't bother making the sails rotate. Instead, just build 4 separate windmills. By facing one toward each cardinal direction, at least one will always be catching a breeze. Ars realizes he doesn't need to perfectly mirror Earth's technology to be effective. Soon, 4 towering windmills are constructed in the breezy northwest region. Positioned right by the wheat fields, they allow the village to thresh and grind their massive harvest with ease. Just as Ars begins to relax, a messenger arrives to summon him for a mandatory etiquette lesson with Clarice. He's been waiting since long before the lesson was scheduled to begin. Ars is about to head out when he's stopped by Bite, who arrives on a Valkyrie to announce that an envoy from Fontana is waiting. Ars quickly realizes that this summons is unlike any before, as previous missions only lasted a month. Standing atop the castle walls, Ars gazes toward Einard Hill to the east, knowing the journey alone will take weeks. With the impending clashes and the return trip, they might not be back before winter. While the peacemakers will hold the fort, most of the army is deploying. Not wanting to burden the Grams entirely, Ars leaves the Baruka Knights in Kyle's hands. Looking out from the ramparts, Kyle reflects on how Ars has always looked out for him, but this mission feels far more serious. Hector approaches, noticing Kyle's somber expression, and asks if he's doing all right. Kyle assures him he's fine, secretly viewing this as his chance to finally repay Ars. Hector warns him not to overwork himself, a promise Kyle is quick to make. The scene shifts to Ars and his father riding Valkyries alongside their soldiers. Ars's father notes that heading toward Einard Hill means they'll likely face off against the Uruk family once again. Curious, Ars asks if his father has fought them before. He explains it was years ago when Ars was just a child obsessed with making money. Back then, his father was a mere foot soldier who never faced a knight directly. But even from afar, he witnessed the Uruk family's terrifying magic, a stark contrast to Fontana's ice spells. Ars is intrigued, especially when he learns the Uruks don't use fire magic as he assumed, but instead practice a unique form of beastification. This magic allows the Uruk family to transform into fox-like humanoids. While several noble houses can shift into beasts, the Uruks specifically manifest fox ears and tails rather than becoming full animals. His father explains that this transformation grants them immense strength and speed. Their hazy fire magic produces flames, though that's the least of their worries. Ars ponders how this differs from his earth magic and Fontana's ice, wondering what other powers exist. Bite interrupts, curious about the transformation, while Leon, who knows their secrets, clarifies that they retain their human forms. They grow fox ears and tails but remain humanoid. Ars, thrilled at the idea of seeing Kimomimi or fox girls in person, asks for confirmation. Leon confirms it, though he's baffled by Ars's sudden intense excitement. Ars is internally losing it, imagining someone like Lilina with animal ears, and expresses how incredible it would be to encounter such a sight. Bite, completely missing the appeal, sternly reminds him that they are marching toward a potential bloodbath, not a festival. But Ars remains unfazed, his mind completely preoccupied with the glorious prospect of fox-eared girls. Thanks to the new road network, the group reaches Fontana just before dawn. The fortress, constructed from tribute bricks, is finally complete, and they arrive with a larger force than ever before. As they march in, some soldiers begin gossiping about Ars, mocking his reputation and small stature, proving his popularity among the ranks is still quite low. Ars's father, ever the pragmatist, tasks him with building a stable while he handles the logistics. Ars agrees and heads off to work. He reflects on the eternal struggle between the Uruk family of the east and the Fontana family of the west, with Einard Hill serving as the strategic heart of the conflict. Because it's the only defensible high ground in the region, controlling the hill is the key to dominating the entire territory. Recently, however, the Uruk family has secured a string of victories, allowing them to occupy the hill. This loss is a massive blow to the Fontana family. Lord Carlos stands before his knights, delivering a fiery speech about reclaiming Einard Hill, asserting that the land is rightfully theirs. He emphasizes that the Uruks are illegally occupying a vital trade route and calls for divine justice to be served on the battlefield. Ars, however, knows the truth. The Uruks held the land not just through strength, but because of the internal chaos within Fontana. After Ars killed Raymond, the man who previously held the family together, the Uruk family saw an opening to seize more land following Raymond's death, believing the Fontana family was now fractured and vulnerable. However, Carlos acted with ruthless efficiency, seizing power and subduing the ringleaders behind Raymond's assassination. By marrying into the Graham family, who had previously opposed Raymond, Carlos solidified his authority and unified the clan. Uncertain of the shifting power dynamics, the Uruks opted for a cautious approach, though they still managed to chip away at the territories surrounding Einard Hill. Ars remains conflicted about the coming invasion, as he despises the role of the aggressor. Yet he understands that to secure lasting peace, the Baruka territory must fulfill its military obligations, accepting the bloodshed as a grim necessity. For now, their grueling labor continues as they focus on infrastructure and preparing for the inevitable storm. While Ars would prefer to avoid the front lines, he knows that the future of Baruka depends on their diligence. Up on the watchtower, Beto grows restless, lounging on the roof while Ars scans the horizon. Beto complains that he expected a glorious battle, not a construction project, but Ars reminds him that these roads are the key to victory. He explains that the Uruks have turned Einard Hill into a massive fortress. This hill is the enemy's nerve center, and to retake it, they must first establish their own logistics and liberate the surrounding villages to choke out the Uruk supply lines. Ars is secretly relieved to be doing groundwork instead of a suicidal charge, though Beto's bloodlust remains unquenched. Ars realizes that Beto's fierce warrior spirit might make it difficult for him to ever adapt to a world at peace. Shifting his focus back to the horizon, Ars raises his binoculars to inspect their progress. Suddenly, his eyes lock onto something strange, a shimmering, hazy movement deep within the tree line. Sensing danger, he lowers the glass. As Beto asks what's wrong, Ars channels mana into his eyes, revealing a massive, dense concentration of magical energy surging through the woods. It's an ambush. A significant enemy force is closing in fast. The two scramble down the tower as urgency takes hold. Ars knows that if they don't move now, the road workers will be slaughtered. Beto notes they aren't ready for a full engagement, but Ars realizes the enemy is moving far too fast for normal infantry. They're riding magic beasts, and based on the mana signatures, there are hundreds of them. Ars curses his own complacency. Having assumed the real fighting was still weeks away, rushing to the stables, he leaps onto Valkyrie just as the earth begins to shake beneath them. The rhythmic thud of approaching hooves draws everyone's attention. Without a second thought, Ars spurs Valkyrie into a gallop, knowing he's the only one who can intercept the threat. His resolve hardens as he charges headlong toward the incoming massacre. Meanwhile, on the Uruk side, scouts report that the Fontana camp is completely unguarded. They believe the enemy is still recovering from their journey, leaving them wide open for a slaughter. Confident in their superior speed, the Uruks plan to trample the Fontana soldiers under the weight of their magic beasts in one swift, brutal strike. With predatory confidence, the Uruk cavalry surges toward the camp, ready to paint the valley red.